I kind of like not having the intro.
We've
just like the
ditched
music
our intro.
You've ditched your intro. Why?
I like going straight into the show. So you go into like a discussion. It sounds like they've already started. I really like that. The problem is somebody said to me that new listeners don't know who you are. So like new listeners come in, they don't know what's going on. They try the show out and it's baffling to them.
Like, hey, you know, like, oh, I'm.
People
you know,
don't even
Arthur
know
Jones.
who we are.
But
People
yeah,
right in, they're like, oh, it's Lo Etienne, I'm Lo Fei, and they're like, they don't know which
I'm
one
kind
of
of
us is which.
leaning towards just like jumping into the discussion.
Well, you've brought this up before.
Yeah.
I like
chaos.
I like fun elements.
Yeah.
I don't like it when it's like, this is what we're talking about. This is what, you know, this is not us.
That's not us too.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm okay with not doing an intro, and then, but
I just like the music to come in, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is,
Which is
like
now,
you got a little bit of a, you know, a little banter, and then the music comes in, and then you get in the show because you kind of have to break it out. You don't roll just right into it.
So let's keep it for the traditional way for now, and then we can, you know, we'll make a call later.
All right.
Why don't you guys start off with the questions? I'm just thinking.
well, he has to do his
yeah,
intro.
I know, but before we don't.
So I did
Okay,
this
I got a
to
question.
you, yeah?
Yeah. So I'm gonna cue you in, and then
Okay.
you're just gonna
Introduce
like,
yourself.
You're like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm
Don't
Arthur
tell him what to
Jones.
do. Don't tell him what to do. Just
Sure.
let him introduce himself.
Micromanage. I'm a micromanager.
These guys are like, I mean, they're all on one. Like
This should be in every show, by the way.
This whole
This discussion every week where you discuss whether or not there's an
because
intro.
we do have this discussion every time.
every time.
We've had a bunch of different introductions.
Me and Paul do the same thing on the show.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Whenever you're ready.
So my name is Arthur Jones, but a lot of people here know me as Lo Fei. I am British and I make documentaries. And now for the last 9-10 months, I make a podcast as well called Fei Tian Hu Shuo, which comes from my name and the co-host Lo Etienne, Paul Wade. And we make it together, and it's a sort of a play on our names.
All right, here's my question. Since you do your podcast in Chinese, do you ever dream in Chinese?
I don't think I have any language in my dreams. I don't think I speak. I think my dreams are really weird
You're a mute.
and
No,
silent.
same here though. Same here.
You don't have
like
that?
things just are in the dream. Like
Yes.
things just happen.
You don't
There's
have
no
conversations?
There's no
I
I
language.
don't think so. Or maybe they're just imagined conversations where there's nobody actually speaking. You just kind of have a sense that there's a language. I don't think there's dialogue scenes, which is weird because I feel like very much a languagey person. Like I'm obsessed with words and stuff. But I don't think I dream in a language. I'm also one of those people, for somebody who makes films, I'm one of those people that doesn't visualize in huge detail. You know, they have that, there's a word for it, I forget the word, where you get someone, you say, imagine this, you imagine this. But if you actually ask the truth of what they're seeing, a lot of people, a huge number of people, like over half of the people, don't see any color when they imagine something. And what they see is very sketchy. It's not a photographic, detailed image. And some people have it in pure detail. And I'm really kind of low on the visual scale.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't have words and I don't have visuals. So I don't know what
do you
I'm
have in your
doing.
brain?
I don't know what's going on.
But that's interesting for
Just
a director,
feelings.
right?
Just feelings, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe why I ended up in documentaries, in the sense that partly you've got to cede control of what's happening. You can't completely plan it out visually because a lot of what I do is observational documentary. So we're kind of following someone around. I don't usually know where we're going to end up. So I can't be too visually focused, otherwise I'd go insane. Mostly I'm kind of focused on story.
Yeah. All right, I'm Justin.
I'm Howie.
I'm Eric.
This is The Honest Drink. Please give it up for Arthur Jones. Any occasion where I would have to get up in front of people and like say a speech, like maybe like at a wedding or a friend's wedding or whatever, I would always write it down. And now I don't do that anymore, and I improvise.
Yeah.
And I did that because I realized that actually writing it down was counterproductive for me. Because I was so obsessed with remembering exactly how I wrote it. And so I found the best way for me was actually just to let that go. And be like, the best speech is the speech that comes most natural approach, rather than trying to obsess over giving the absolute best speech in the world that I can possibly give.
For me, they're almost like contradictory worlds. Like you can't do both. You have to do one or the other. So I'm the same. If I have to give a speech or it's on TV, if I'm doing something on TV and it's a speech at like a film festival, not a speech, but you know, an awards thing, I'm having to say a few words. I have to get the words because they don't want it improvised. Usually, sometimes they do, but mostly they don't. And then I really have to learn it. Like I really have to learn it. Also because you do a lot of, if you do Chinese TV, they'll often put the words on a teleprompter at the back of the room. And I've often found when you get into the room and try and do it, because of lighting that's on your face, it's actually very hard to read the thing at the back. And, you know, I've seen myself a couple of times on TV and I'm like going like this, looking at the back of the room and it looks really weird. What's he doing? Because the audience can't see that. So on TV, you just look weird. You can't see what it's just the guy's like doing
off
this.
the cuff.
That's right.
The top of my head.
You know, speaking from the heart. So I'll try to memorize it anyway. But the other way is to really be in the moment.
Yeah.
But you know what? I kind of feel like after all these years, oh, well, if it doesn't go that well, it doesn't go that well. Do you know what I mean? It's like if I'm going to go and improvise and it's not perfect, the honest truth is half the audience isn't listening anyway at most things. Exactly. They're not taking it in word by word. They're not feeling the sweat flowing like you are. They're just kind of there and listening, half listening. And the other thing is I kind of expect when I work filming people, I'm expecting them to be really honest and in the moment. So what am I doing why am I doing it the other way? Like that's my whole job, is to try and get people to just be real and alive and not being too self-aware. And there's a camera in the room. That's the vibe I'm trying to give them. So why would I do it a different way? I have so much respect for people when they're in my film and then they do something like start crying when they're telling a story, because I couldn't do that.
You can't prompt that.
It'd be so unusual for me to be able to do that on camera. It's not that it's never happened, but I know that feeling. I've been filmed a fair amount just for work. And to be genuine and emotional is really hard on camera. So when somebody does it for me, I'm incredibly moved by them doing it. So I always aspire to trying to be in the moment and just being as free and loose as possible. Like there's so many ways to make a documentary. And I've shot a lot of TV as well. I've done Discovery stuff and Nat Geo stuff and BBC stuff and Chinese channels and stuff. And often, for very good reason, it's highly formatted because limitations of time, or it's a series that already has a look. You can't just reinvent the wheel. You come along, you got to shoot it the way they do it. So when they're doing it that way, we'll often have to do that classic thing, which is where you see two people having a conversation and then suddenly, for me, a reel pulls you out of the moment. You see the close-up on the hand. But because of the previous shot, I know there was no camera in the position to get the hand. So obviously they shot it at the end. For me, that pulls me out. But I know, it's film language. So most audiences, because of film and TV, were trained to not feel that's weird. It's a pleasant feeling. I'm getting the close-up that I needed. But when I'm shooting my projects that I've worked on for years, mostly my kind of default for shooting is to tell the crew we're not going to do that. So I need them to move around so that you can get the close-up without being in the other shot. And if you miss it, we don't get it. So I'll say that to the crew. I'll say, it's gone. We're not going to go and reshoot anything. And the main reason is not some kind of like highfalutin kind of like, oh, there's a principle, I don't do it. It's because it turns your characters into actors. Because they know that you're stopping and starting. Or a director might say, and I've done this many times, oh, guys, can we just skip through this? Can we just go to the bit where you say this and we'll just do that? Not that they have a script, but they know we're going to deal some
they
issues.
can't really be in the moment. And then they're just kind of like going through the motions in a way.
Because then it feels like really produced, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just like capturing it.
Well, and I can no longer say to them when they go, what am I supposed to be doing? I can no longer say, just do what you want. I'm just filming you doing you.
Yeah.
Because they know that from time to time, I'm stopping them, I'm making them do something. So they know, sure, you're telling me to be me, but I know in a minute. And then you get the awkward situation, which is you get a character, by which I just mean a person whose story you're filming, saying, hey, Arthur, should I do that thing in a minute with my hands or should I do it now? And I don't want them being so aware of the process.
Self-conscious. Well,
so I want them to be pure in that approach. So I don't want to make the crew stop, even though they're perfectly capable of doing it. Because I don't want that person in my production to ever say, hey, 导演, director, should we do this? Should we? No, you just do you.
Like you said, you don't want them to be acting.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm trying to keep that really pure in the moment. So in the best, or not the best, because TV can have that format. It's not fake. It's the way you have to put things together. When you have a budget, you can't follow someone for 5 days. You maybe have 2 hours with them. So you got to get everything. And it's fair enough. There's nothing wrong with it. But when I'm shooting something that I'm passionate about, if I have the budget or if there's no budget, but we're just doing it because we believe in it, we want to get it done. I want people to be them. I want the crew to be the crew, and I want the people in the film to be them. I don't want them to think about how we're making the film. Because it's much easier to say over the first day, your role is to just be you, and we're just going to follow you around. I'm not going to tell you to do anything. Once in a while, we might stop and have a chat, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're not here for me. We're filming your story. And if you can keep it really pure like that, then after a day or so, they begin to just accept they're being filmed, then it's not anything to be concerned
Do
about.
they just forget that there's even a camera sometimes? And
That's
just
the
kind of-
ideal, I guess. Yeah, that's the ideal. But I'm not sure it ever completely happens. But they just become much more kind of like clear about what it is that's going on. You're interested in them, not them being a version of them.
Yeah.
That's the ideal. I mean, it's like you aspire to that, but you never quite reach it. You know, you're always pushing for that as the ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Howie, are you following along? I mean, when we talk film language stuff, it's hard for him to keep up, you know?
Yeah, could you repeat that again?
I mean, if you look at like a big Chris Nolan film, like a Dunkirk or a Interstellar or something, or, you know, the shots where they've got explosions and any kind of, you know, a lot of extras, 100, 200, 1,000 extras in the background, they're shooting those things on 20, 25 cameras
Yeah.
because you cannot waste that take.
That explosion.
You
It's
can't
so
redo it,
expensive to do it. You probably can redo it, maybe
It's easier
once or
just
twice.
to clean up the cameras and the people that are shooting in the frame
Yes.
or whatever than to do it again.
Yeah. When we were shooting in the 6, we had a few scenes in there where I pulled more cameras in, and there's a scene in that film where we put Stephen, the protagonist, in cold water in a cold water test.
Oh, yeah, I
Just
love
that
that
one scene, I think we had 6 cameras, but that was not typical of the
Because
shoot.
he's only doing it once.
You only do it once. The space is very complex, and we needed to be able to get expressions, close-ups, wides. The tech staff, the scientists who were doing the test, we needed expressions, all that stuff. You're just going to miss it with 2 cameras.
Exactly.
I really appreciated that scene, by the way, because it kind of just, as you say in the film, it puts into perspective just a little bit of the horror of what it must have been like to be in that water at that time. And like, I know it was a while ago, but I do want to talk a little bit about the film you directed, The Six, as you just mentioned. We all just watched it. And
you hated it, yeah?
I feel awkward right now. I think I should leave.
yeah, you know, maybe we shouldn't be here. No, I didn't know what to expect going in. As I was watching it, I was blown away. Yeah, I really enjoyed the film. Even Howie and Eric know I came in here just kind of like raving about it, and we were like spitballing all these moments in the film where it just like kind of hit you, and put a lot of things into context. And there's so many different threads to pull on in the film, from, you know, like the historical events of the, you know, the Chinese Exclusion Acts to just the life of the Fan Lang guy, who later might have became Fan Wing's son.
That's
right?
it. Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Well, I think we can say he did. I mean, I think it's pretty much
Like, that's his
confirmed. I think that is him. And
There's
it is
enough
confirmed.
evidence
Wait,
too.
let's just back up, right?
Sure.
But so you make documentaries, I guess people can tell by we're like 20 minutes into the show. So we have a pretty well-known filmmaker that makes documentaries, and then this particular one, The Six. Like, what's the headline, right, about it? Because it's about the Titanic, but it's like an untold story.
That's it.
Yeah.
So essentially, the sort of the log line, the pitch would be, it's potentially the last great story of Titanic that hasn't been told. When we came across this story, the headline was that Stephen, who's our main researcher and my partner in the project, sort of creative partner on the film, and the main researcher on screen,
Stephen Schwenker.
Stephen Schwenker, yeah, that's right. I used to work with him for years we used to be film writers. We used to cover the film industry in China. We were working for Variety, the Hollywood magazine. And so I knew Stephen, and he was doing maritime stories, and we'd done a film together, a much smaller budget, but like a fun film we did called The Poseidon Project, which was trying to find a British submarine that had sunk off the coast of Shandong in 1931 and was lost, and there was a mystery about where it was and could it be dived and that kind of stuff. So we'd done that. We sort of knew how we wanted to approach history films, which was to not do kind of like what we think of as like repackaged history, where you take a famous thing and you go, and here's the retelling of the history. I don't know why I went into American accent, but you know, it's like, do you know what I mean? I don't know why I did that.
Cowboy accent too.
Well, Stephen's American, right?
He is American, but I'm not thinking of his voice. I'm more thinking of like a classic kind of 80s. I'm very down on the 80s today, but the 80s, it was Van Damme first.
Maybe that's the
80s,
voice
and
you dream in. Also,
maybe
you just
that is
don't know.
the voice.
Right.
I didn't want to do that. I wanted to find a way to make history films that felt alive, like we were actually looking for something new that hadn't been discovered. So when Stephen said to me towards the end of the Poseidon Project, oh, you know, the story we should do is like the Titanic the story of the Chinese on Titanic. And I kind of like laughed and went, oh yeah, if there were any.
Yeah.
You know, I thought he was joking.
If you were any.
I was like, because obviously, I mean, I wasn't a big history. I wasn't one of those kids that was really into history. And I just thought, oh, he's making a joke. Because obviously I'd have heard of it. I've been in China for almost 20 years at that point.
Yeah, no one knew they were Chinese.
Yeah,
people,
and they're famous. Like the people on Titanic are famous. They're either in one of the films or, you know, when Titanic anniversaries come up, the press will go and interview a descendant and, you know, they'll talk about it because it's like a big thing. It's a fun thing to talk about.
Well, and they found, like, we found the Titanic. Like, I mean,
That's it.
When did they find the Titanic?
It's mid-'80s, I think. I think it's
Okay.
mid-'80s. They found Titanic. So it came back again, and then everyone knew Cameron was working on the film. And it was like, how could I not know there were Chinese on board? That doesn't make any sense. And then
Of course, there was Chinese on board.
Stephen showed me a passenger list. It had these names on, Chinese people. There were like 8 names. And I said, oh, so there were. I guess I just didn't know. And then I sort of pushed back because I thought, I don't want the Titanic film. It's not really my thing. And I'd just done a history film. I didn't. Then I started asking friends, Chinese friends, and saying, oh, I'm thinking about this film about the Chinese people on Titanic. And they were like the same. They would go, oh, right, yeah. If there were, that'd be fun, wouldn't it? Yeah. And I'd be like, no, there were. There were Chinese people on Titanic. And they'd be like, what?
And then all of a sudden,
And then I was like, oh my God, maybe this is a film. Because and that's when I realized there was this like way of doing it where you could take something which is really crucial to documentaries, because how do you get people to come and watch it? It's really hard. You know, they're often quite obscure things. Or what you're trying to say might be something that's really important to you about human history or human rights or, you know, whatever. So, you know, it might be something about immigration or some big story, but like, how do you get into getting people to be interested in it? And Titanic was such a great way to do that. So the headline was, it's Titanic, and this is the story of the 6 Chinese passengers on Titanic who survived. There were 8 passengers, 6 survived, so they had the highest survival rate of any.
How many people were on the
group.
whole ship total?
It's like around 2,200, including crew. And about 700 people survived. So like 1 in 3 people survived.
So that's a lot.
Survive?
I mean, did you know that 1/3 of the people survived? Like, would you have guessed?
Yeah, something like that.
it's interesting that you said that's a lot. I don't.
No, I mean, it's a sad thing. I'm just saying, like, you know, because
More than you thought.
When you hear about the Titanic, it was like it crashed in an iceberg and the whole thing sank and stuff.
And it's
right?
a famous big tragedy. So I guess it's
Like
possible.
Leo
I guess
died.
they all died.
Yeah.
Leo died. That's
well,
right.
no, that's exactly to my point. I think watching your film really put things into perspective, because before then, setting aside the Chinese angle of the Chinese passengers on board that no one really knew were even on board.
Yeah.
I grew up in a time where, the James Cameron film Titanic was such a blockbuster hit, became so big globally. And by the way, it was interesting to learn from James Cameron directly in your film that what made the film as big as it was really the Chinese market.
Oh yeah.
It was like disproportionately bigger for the Titanic than all the other markets.
Well, because the thing that people don't realize, Titanic was hugely important for the film industry because it was the first, I may have got this wrong, and I used to do a lot of film industry writing, but I think I'm right. It was the first revenue sharing foreign film in China. So previous to that, there were foreign films played in the cinema, but they were always bought for like a flat fee. They pay a few $1,000s. Nobody expected to make any money in China, so they just make a few thousand for selling a film to the Chinese market, and it didn't matter how well it did. But in this case, it's Fox and Paramount made the film. It's a co-studio because it was so expensive to make. And they made a deal with, I think, the China Film Group or one of the big, government bodies here that distributes films, puts them on. And it was revenue sharing. So suddenly Hollywood studios had a share of the revenue. They had a stake in it doing really well. So Cameron came over. I think Kate and Leo came over at some point. I'm not sure if they came over initially, but they were certainly like talking to China and trying to get the film to do well. And it just exploded. I think for thematic reasons. I think because it was a huge love story and it was saying, there was something about that story that resonated. It was to do with like being allowed to fall in love with the wrong person, or there was something slightly transgressive about it. And it was
just hit a chord.
Something about it. Like you can be more than the sum of your material goods or something. I guess for young people it's like, wow, I could be this. I could have a life like this, or it doesn't, just because I don't have much money doesn't mean I can't fall in love or have a great life.
A working class boy can, fall in love and get together with a upper class, girl. Right?
I think it meant something. So the film was really huge. So it was even more strange to us that people didn't know Chinese people were on board. And The twist in this is that Cameron, and this is the reason why we tried to get in touch with him for a while before we did manage to do that, was because he had shot a scene that we became aware of fairly early on of a Chinese guy floating on a piece of wood and calling out in Cantonese, help me, come here, come. In the aftermath, he was trying to get himself rescued, and a boat came and picked him up. A famous boat, lifeboat number 14, came and picked him up in this scene. I was like, this is crazy. How did Cameron know about this? So we were like, and that was the story, by the way. That was true. I mean, we now know because we, got in touch with Jim, as I'm allowed to call him now. We got in touch with Jim and his team, and they knew the story, but they guessed because the guy that they cast in that role, which is Fang Lang from our film, the guy that role of Fang Lang, he had a post-production supervisor who was in his crew who James Cameron said to him, would you mind playing this character for me? I want to shoot this scene. And that guy happened to be a Chinese-American Chinese guy who spoke Cantonese. But that was just chance. So in that scene, he's calling out in Cantonese, which is, we now know what he would have been calling out.
So they shot that scene just by pure chance? Like, they didn't know
Cameron
about the
was
real story?
aware of the scene. No, he was aware of the fact this had happened. In his research, he'd come across the story of this Chinese guy on a piece of wood. And there were some versions of that story where they said it was somebody Japanese, but he happened to make the right choice. He said, no, I'm going to go with them being Chinese. I think the evidence suggests they were Chinese. And then the random bit is he cast someone from his post-production team.
Yeah, that spoke Cantonese.
Would you mind playing this part for me tomorrow or whatever? The guy said yes. Actually, we got in touch with that guy. I've had an email exchange with him. Cool guy. And he said, I'll do it. And then Jim basically said to him, and can you call out like, help, come and get me? And the guy just made it up. And he did it in Cantonese because that's the only Chinese language he spoke, and it's completely authentic to what actually happened. When we looked at it, he nailed it. He got it right. And in fact, that actor, Jim had got him to appear in the background of 2 or 3 other scenes, but over the years, nobody had really noticed. It was a passing moment when he passed behind Leo in the corridor at one point and did something else. So I hadn't seen it. I hadn't noticed it. And that scene, the crucial scene, ended up being cut from the film.
That's one of the many moments, several moments in your film that my mouth was just dropped open. I was like, yeah. When you told Tom, was it?
That's right.
Who is the son of Fan Lang, right? And his family, you told him, do you guys know about this deleted scene in Titanic? And I was like, there's a deleted scene? And then you show him, and it depicts exactly what he's been told.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Of Fan Lang on a wooden door or some wooden panel floating there. And that's what inspired the famous, iconic ending scene of Titanic with Rose and, Leo, his character, and Jack, right? Floating there where Jack dies.
Yeah. I mean, that was the funny thing. We tried to get in touch with James Cameron to ask him 2 things. Like, where did you know about this? Where did you come across this story? And why did you put it in the film? And then the second, so we were just like, that's amazing that you were aware of this.
Yeah.
And secondly, because it's not easy to find that information. I mean, that story comes from one particular press report, an interview that happened after Titanic with a woman called, I think her name was Charlotte Collier. And she was interviewed afterwards by the press. And she said that she had been in that boat, Lifeboat 14. She'd gone back with Howard Lowe, the guy who was in charge of that boat, the sailor who was in charge. Who'd gone back to pick up people from the water. It's the only lifeboat that went back. She said she got on it and witnessed a Chinese guy and 3 other people being pulled out of the water. And that the Chinese guy got out and helped to row the boat back. He was like very helpful. She said this. Afterwards, a lot of people said, well, she wasn't on that boat. There was no woman on that boat. So she just made it up. Because there were all sorts of made up stories during Titanic. But James Cameron decided to believe that story and go for it. I'm tempted to think she wasn't lying. Lots of chaos happened during Titanic. She probably just wasn't noticed. She happened to tell a story that's completely true. So either she was there or she heard someone else say it and somehow in her head, she felt like she's the one that did it. Whatever the reason is. But that was one of 2 questions. Where the hell did you find this story? Yeah. I mean, he's making this huge film with thousands of characters. Why did he pick that one up? Where did he come across it? And why turn it into a scene? And secondly, which I thought was crucial, was how did it end up getting deleted? Why would you shoot it? I mean, I know as a filmmaker, you shoot a lot of things, you don't put them in the film. But it had been featured on one version of the DVD that came out, like a deluxe version. They put 20 deleted scenes, and it was one of them. Again, went completely unnoticed. Nobody seemed to notice that there was a scene that was on one version. It wasn't on most versions, but one version. And I wanted to ask him, and you're exactly right. What James told us was that it was it was the inspiration of the Jack and Rose scene. They were picked up, or she was picked up by Lifeboat 14 as well, and she was floating on a piece of wood. So it had inspired that scene. He felt it was important enough to film it, but then in the edit, it was kind of like doubling up a story. It was sort of like a pre-shadowing of their story. So why would you have two people picked up from a piece of wood picked up by the same lifeboat?
Yeah, it decreases that magic of that moment.
That's right.
Yeah,
but these are things you don't know till post. Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because when our film came out, some people were kind of angry. Well, how dare he cut that scene? I was used to say, I think that's he shot the scene. It wasn't that he cut the scene. Do you know what I mean? Like he wanted to put it in. It clearly just didn't work in post. But people sort of misunderstand how these things work. They felt like he'd cut the Chinese guy from the film. I mean, he's the only one that knew there was a Chinese guy in the story. Like he was the only
and went out of his way to actually shoot the scene in the first place.
Yeah, he actually went out of his way. It cost money to do. He'd done the whole thing. Yeah. And they're going through the water, and there's all these bodies in the water because we now know, partly because of the cold water test we did with Stephen, that there was a time limit for how long Fang Long could have been in the water and survived.
What was the time limit? How long people?
Well, there's a few things that. First of all, during that test, the guy we worked with there, the professor at Portsmouth University, told us that their evidence is that something up to around a third of people who jumped in the water, and most people jumped, they didn't go down, they jumped off a deck. Cameron's film was fairly accurate on this. They jumped off a higher deck, maybe not as high as you see in the film, but lower decks. About a third of people who jump into water that's around 0 degrees die immediately because they have a shock gasp response. And a gasp response, he told us, is really interesting. You tend to swallow, to breathe in about 2 liters of water. 1 liter of salt water is like a lethal immediate dose. So if you a liter of water, you tend to die, like immediately. So around a third of people that jumped in, maybe 25%, a third would have died immediately. The people that got in the water, sometimes we say they drowned. Most people didn't drown because they all had life jackets. They got hypothermia, and most people were unresponsive within about half an hour. Most people dead by an hour. There might have been a few people you couldn't tell. One of the problems was the lifeboats just didn't really go back, though. So there may have been people floating around who were technically alive, but just were unresponsive. But they were never pulled out the water. So most people would have been dead by an hour. Many people would have been dead by about half an hour. And we think Fang Long was up on the board by about 20 minutes. That's what that test said. If he hadn't got out by about 20 minutes to lift his torso out the water, he wouldn't have been able to pull himself out.
Yeah.
As we can see from Stephen, that water wasn't even at 0 for us because legally they wouldn't do it.
Yeah, so just to give the listeners a little context as part of the scene, not to give too much away, but because I would highly encourage anyone to go back and watch this film, The Six. But one of the scenes in the beginning is Stephen, the host of the documentary, you guys go to a lab, right?
That's right.
And it's like this water submersion lab. Where
it's actually part of they have a department, the coolest name ever. They call it the Human Endurance Department. So they're testing extreme temperatures, oxygen, different chemical mixes. It's part of Portsmouth University.
Portsmouth.
Yeah. And this guy's like the world expert on that.
Yeah.
So a lot of navies and different institutions go there to test out extreme environments and how the human body does. But one of the things they do is test out cold water survival.
And even the scientists there were saying it'd be unethical to reproduce 0 degrees, which was what the water was at that time.
It does come with a certain danger. Actually, Stephen had to go through a special heart test a few weeks before we did that. They had to check there wasn't underlying heart condition because even at 12 degrees, you can trigger a shock response that can throw you into a heart attack, basically. But the other thing was that 12 degrees, this is what they told us. So it was at 12 degrees, which is still super cold if you put your hand in. 12 degrees, you can extrapolate to 0. So all the figures that you hit around 12 degrees extrapolate down. So if the body loses temperature at this speed, you can just work out the maths to take it down to 0. Oh. So, but above 12 degrees, it's not correlated exactly correctly. So they have a set temperature that they can do all these tests at.
I see.
And when Stephen went in, he was in there for about 40 minutes. I mean, he had basically 0 control of his hands anymore.
Yeah, he was shaking.
I saw it. It was like...
And you said he's a trained scuba diver,
That's right.
So he's not just like random guys
No. He's swum in cold water.
Yeah.
He's swum in cold water. But, you go in with different types of suit that can protect you, the timing, all that kind of stuff. When you're in an uncontrolled environment, in clothing, and you go under, your body, even when you don't have that gasp response, has a kind of a shutdown mechanism. The blood is pulled in towards the core, and you basically lose control. And if you were swimming, at that point, you would drown. So you wouldn't be able to stay afloat because you would lose control of your limbs.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the fact that you guys went out of your way to like kind of make it as try to recreate it as best as possible by him wearing like, you know, just like normal Chinese garb, like Chinese wear. Not he wasn't wearing like a wetsuit or anything.
No.
He was just wearing
We
what
thought
he
we'd do that
they would be
because
wearing.
cotton clothes have a certain quality and they hold the wet and the temperature a certain way close to the body. So they actually recommended us that the Human Endurance Department said to us, if you can find anything that's similar to what you think they would have worn, then that would be useful. And we actually got an incredible costume designer who's like a film costume designer, randomly a friend of my parents, to make that costume based on all the best evidence we had. So every layer of it was like incredibly complicated. And it was what we're talking about. We went in on that day and we had like 2 hours and we had to get it all. And we didn't know what was going to turn up in the results. We didn't know if Stephen was going to be able to do anything. Some of the tests we didn't know they were coming up. They make them put like a nut on a screw and try and do that. And he'd lost control of his fingers and things. It was very kind of dramatic to watch.
My immediate reaction was like he was in shock or something after he got out of the water. Because like his hands were just like, and then I just saw his face and he was just like, I mean, I don't even, you know, his mind was frozen at the moment.
And I
That's
think
what I felt.
I mean, the funny thing about the scene is there were 2 scenes in the film where very near the beginning of that project, I sat down a bit on my own, a bit with Stephen, and we kind of, alongside the general, like, how's this going to play out? What do we need to get on camera to make a film of this? I mean, it were simple things like we knew we had to find at least one descendant. Otherwise, we didn't really have a character who was connected to them on that level. And an earlier ambition was we had to find something that no textbook, history book, we had to find new stuff that literally hadn't been found. You know, it wasn't just that we were repackaging. We had to find new stuff. So we had to do that. But the other part was we had a list of scenes that we thought they'd just be great things to film. You wouldn't necessarily need them, but the 2 things that Stephen put in were 2 of my favorite scenes. One is the cold water scene, and the other is the reconstructed boat scene. Stephen insisted that we try to reconstruct. Now, I didn't really understand why he needed to do that. It didn't even really make sense to me.
The lifeboat you're talking about?
Yeah, There was the collapsible lifeboat. It was not the lifeboat that rescued Feng Long from the water. It was another one that 3 of the Chinese guys, 3 or 4, depending on which account you look at, had got into. But it became the center of a huge controversy about whether or not they'd stolen the seats of women and children who should have been rescued. And because it was the heart of that story, when Stephen said, we need to build the lifeboat, like I'm not going to do it with a model and put little action figures in it and do that. We need to build it because I want to see what it looks like. Because a lot of that story, the evidence of whether or not Chinese guys had, we said, you know, in big speech marks, hidden themselves in there, depending on what you mean by hidden. Like, is hidden when you can't see someone? Or for me, hidden means you are deliberately hiding. You can't be hidden accidentally. Do you know what I mean? Like it.
Yeah, there's definitely a negative connotation.
Yeah, they were trying to hide.
I mean, I think one of the questions that is on people's minds is, you know, was their survival, given that there was such a high fatality rate of all of the sort of the third class people on the boat, like literally like,
we should say they were
dozens and dozens and dozens of people, right?
Yeah. Probably
like the Austro-Hungarians, apparently every single one of them died.
The Bulgarians were like 30-something Bulgarians, all died.
And so the question is...
and for men, just to be clear, the third-class men, I think it was like 1 in 6 survived.
Yeah.
They had the lowest survival rate.
Yeah. And because my understanding was that, you know, like maybe the Chinese were generally together, the Bulgarians were together, you have to assume, because then they all died sort of together, right? So they had a similar strategy. How much of it was luck? How much of it was because they had some kind of unfair advantage that, you know?
Well, the Chinese, as it turned out, they were sailors.
That's correct.
They were sailors.
So there's lots of, so those are like sort of, you know, open questions.
Yeah, and then we're never going to find an absolute black and white, here's the answer. But we were trying to sort of examine those theories about why they would have had a survival rate that was so high. I mean, I think there are 2 countries that have a higher survival rate. But that's because they were single people from that country and they survived. So they had 100% survival rate. But for any group of people from a country, they were the highest survival rate.
Well, and I still need to finish watching it. So some of my comments might not reflect sort of full knowledge of the film. But I think a great documentary is not one that has all the answers, of course, because these things happened so long ago. So a great documentary is something, you know, that examines like whatever the evidence is, and then usually leaves a couple of things on a cliffhanger so that people can kind of decide in their moment. That's the cool part of it. The other piece I just wonder is that because there's only a very small number of Chinese people compared to some of the other groups, right? So then, you look at, well, where was their position on the boat? If there was one strong leader among the 6, maybe it's easier, or 8 or however many, maybe it's easier to actually lead a group of 8 versus lead a group of 50. So there's so many things that can be sort of speculative as well.
That's right.
And at the same time, you've got to have enough, I don't know, like a gut instinct or conviction that maybe there's something there. And as you started the conversation, you said every story about the Titanic's already been told. So to take that leap of faith, and I imagine there's lots of funding and you've got to pitch this to investors, that we think there's something there. We don't know what it is. It might turn out to be nothing. And then we're kind of like, we wasted all this money. But like, at what point did you and Stephen have this gut feeling like, okay, let's do this. There's something here. And no matter what, we're going to be able to create something cool.
Well, as soon as we found Tom Fong. We found the guy that at the time we thought there was a very good chance he was the son of Fong Long. We found him, I think, about 7 or 8 months from the beginning. We sort of used journalism methods. We sort of found traces of him online. We got a hint from someone that someone had claimed to be a son, but it had just been like 15, 16 years before. And we managed to find
the age didn't work out on the other one?
No, the age of Fong Lang was problematic, but over time we began to realize that all of the ages were completely unreliable. When I say age, I mean the age of the passengers on the ship.
Like the records
They
were
were too young to have kids or what, or
they
too
might.
old.
No, it's more that, of course, one of our challenges was to find who these guys were with their kind of nickname English versions of their Chinese names. When I say English, I don't mean they were called like Steve. I mean, the
transliteration.
The transliteration.
But
of
it
their
wasn't
Chinese names.
using the modern system.
It
you have to
was
think,
pre-pinyin.
back then, the guy actually writing it down was just probably some guy who doesn't speak any Chinese.
That's right.
Writing down what he thinks he's hearing from
And then
these guys.
probably-
Right. It's like Don Corleone going to America and there's like randomly writing down their
That's
names,
it.
right?
So it's like, it's probably some like American dude just writing something down who doesn't understand anything that's coming
the
out of
funny
their
one
mouths.
was early in
That's
the film.
record.
You'll remember there was a name that in all the textbooks, because they have occasionally been listed in the survivors' textbooks. There was a name there that this guy, one of the Chinese guys, was constantly listed as Ali Lam, and we were like,
Right. Yeah,
Ali?
yeah,
That doesn't
Ali,
make any
yeah.
sense. We're like, Ali Lam? Why would the Chinese guy be called Ali Lam? That's a really weird name. At that point, you got to remember that the vast majority of Chinese, especially workers or sailors, did not have the concept of being called Paul Lam. They weren't taking English names.
Yeah, this was 1912 we're talking about.
I mean, they
right?
were just using their Chinese names
Yeah.
and then sometimes the nickname, the shorter version of their name.
There
And
was
then-
no Howie Lamb back
Arthur,
then.
that's like
There
you
was
coming
no
to
highlight.
China and then 你中文名字是什么?
Yeah.
And you're like, Arthur Jones.
Arthur Jones, yeah, that's
So
right.
like, okay,
So you get, it's exactly like that. So the names were written down badly, the ages were bad, and then in the case of Tom Fong, this guy who turned up online many years ago, and we just sort of found the traces, the fossilized traces of his tentative, like, I might be the son of, we sort of found him that way, and there was no contact, so we had to find a way. But the problem with him was he was so young. I mean, the thing is that we're in an age now, I think the last Titanic survivor died, I don't know, 15 years ago now. Their children are all dying as well. I mean, their children are in their 90s now. I mean, there's, you talk about grandchildren and some of the grandchildren in their 80s. I mean, it's a long time ago and then this guy turns up and he's like barely 60 and he's claiming to be a son. How do you make sense of that?
I know.
It just doesn't make any sense.
And that was exactly what I was thinking in the moment.
This
And
is
like,
Titanic. It's 110 years
that
ago.
was like the
This guy,
one
like, it's gotta
comment
be
I
a
made is
lie.
like, dude, how could he have a kid? Like I literally looked up the Titanic and I was like 1912. So
That's
what
right.
the fuck?
Like
And then-
literally, Justin and I were talking about the moments in the film
The
that were really
touching
touching
moments.
and the
Eric's
great moments.
focusing on the guy's age when he had a kid.
The first
It's like
comment that
his
Eric comes
sperm
out with.
was still working at age 70. Like
I know.
literally, that was
You were
like, you were
interested
thinking the
in
same.
this.
See,
Of course.
see.
Of course, because we're looking for holes in the story because we have to find the descendant. Otherwise, Stephen and I had said, back to your question, how do we know what was the point we said we're definitely going to do it? Because this is so true of many of the independent films I make is you got to find a point where you go, okay, whatever happens, we're going to make this now.
Yeah.
And for me,
or you cut your losses, right?
you cut losses, but the problem with that is I didn't want to. Once you've got a descendant and you sit on a sofa with them and they tell you their story, what are you going to do? Like stay in touch for a couple of days and go, sorry, Tom, hey, didn't work out. Oh, he's opened up to us and his family archives and we meet his kids and we go to diners with them and we chat and we hang out and we laugh and cry about stuff and like incredible. And then you go, I guess I'm not going to make it then, because I ain't getting money. So at that point we said, we're going to make it. It's going to get made. Like 7-8 months in, we'd worked out the Ali Lamb thing. We're like, well, that's crazy. First of all, that's going to get corrected in all the books from now on. And then we found some other problems with the story, and we began to realize what the problems were with the names, and we began to get a sense of there's a chance they might all be from one area in China. I think some of them knew each other. There were things that aren't necessarily in the film, like when they left Titanic, they went on, some of them, to continue to work in shipping. Just to be clear, they weren't sailors on Titanic, they were passengers, but that was their job. They were being seconded over to the US on Titanic to go and work. They were sent over there by a shipping company, but they weren't working on Titanic. But after Titanic, we began to find them in shipping records over time, different ships, and just who was with who. You get Alam with Chung Chip, and you get, another two of them are on another ship, and then there's Fong Long, who's now using a different version of the name Fong Long with another, and you can do it. But you realize the ages are constantly changing.
Totally.
So there were all sorts of holes in that story. But once we had Tom Fong, and we began to sort of correct the history books, we were like, okay, we have to do this.
Yeah.
But it was I think we were 2 years in before we got any funding.
But there's a lot of compelling evidence in there that corroborates his story in terms of him actually being Fong Long.
Well, I got to tell you, there was the thing that we realized early on, probably around the time we found Tom, we began to realize that there was another way of doing it, which was to work backwards, to like start with us and try and work backwards to try and meet them.
Reverse engineer the timeline.
Sort of reverse the timeline and see if we could find a way to do that. We kept saying, what would prove that Fong Long was this guy who died in his late 80s in like Milwaukee or so wherever, somewhere in Wisconsin. What would be the how would we prove that? Would it be a photograph? Well, we didn't have a photograph of him pre-Titanic. So you could see the guy later, but you couldn't see the guy earlier. Would it be a signature? But he's changed his name. So, I mean, you could see the handwriting. What would it be? And what it turned out to be was a thing we tried to repeat with others of them as well, which was we tried to trace them back until they met and then see if they disappeared. Do you know what I mean? So they disappeared. If you went backwards with Fong Wing Sung, would there be a moment when Fong Wing Sung appeared in history? When was the first record of him? And when was the last record of Fong Long?
Oh, yeah,
And
because
if
the name changed.
The name changed. And if it really was a name change,
They wouldn't overlap.
and there was no overlap, then it had to be him because there's no other explanation.
Yeah, were they in the same place or roughly the same time frame?
Exactly. And that's what we did. Now, here's the funny thing about the film is that gets told by a researcher called Cynthia Lee, who's in the US. Incredible woman, incredible research. She's such a great job. But she's such a professional that the way that she said it in the film was, could it be da-da-da? Is the evidence here, the evidence there? Is it good enough? It's good enough. And it was like, that's how we did it in the film. And sometimes I look back and I think, we should have said that more clearly. That's him. There's no other explanation because literally Fong Long is on a boat.
Same city.
He ends up in New York.
Within the same month, right?
They're there for
within
a
1
month on a ship called, I think, the Rhonda, I think it's called, or the Rondo. And it's there docked in New York. It's ready to head off. And when it heads off, he's not on it anymore. And Fong Wing Sung, the guy that is what Tom's father called himself, he literally appeared that month in New York.
Yeah.
That's the first record of him. And it's like, okay.
And that's the last time you hear of Fong Lang, and then
He's
forever
gone.
it's
Fong Lang's
like,
gone, and Fong Wing Sung is born.
Yeah.
That's really
This is so
yeah.
interesting. So I have a few comments and a question.
Yeah.
So to this one, it's like those movies. I don't know. Clive Owens has been in these movies where there's a heist, and so everyone goes in, and you know when they went in, and then you see everyone come out. And then you're like, where the fuck did these people go?
Yeah.
And then they changed disguises or whatever it
Yes.
is. And that's exactly
That's
what
what
it is.
happened. And he appeared. And the funny thing is, when we finally got his, we did an FO, a Freedom of Information request. We did in the States through another incredible researcher called Grant Din, who works out of California, mainly in San Francisco, does a lot of genealogy work, trying to help Chinese families work out where they're from and, some sort of family roots kind of work. And he applied for us and for Tom, and we got his alien certificate of naturalization or whatever it is. It's the paperwork that is used to assess him. And not only was that where we found that he first claimed to have come into the US in that month in New York, it was also the crazy thing, the first time Tom had even seen the word sailor next to his father's name. He'd never told him he was a sailor. Forget about Titanic, he never told him he was a sailor for like 10 years. Nothing. He hadn't told him anything.
Yeah.
On that paperwork, we found 3 other aliases he'd used over the years. Because it was in that paperwork we discovered that he only naturalized. He only became American in the 1960s. So, or 50s, 60s. So he had spent 30 years as an undocumented immigrant in the US, which, you know, again, is like such a resonant idea that this guy has struggled to fulfill this kind of dream he had of like settling and, you know, being a citizen and trying to set up a company. He had set up like 5 different companies and every single one of them failed. And he always put on that suit that he had claimed in the insurance. He was traveling with collars and neckties. I mean, he's a seaman. He's working on a boat and he's traveling with neckties. I mean, it's so insane, and it made him so different from the rest of them, who were clearly people who were working on ships. He clearly did not want to do that, and he had a mission, and he was supposed to. And the more we found out, we discovered that he and 2 of the other Chinese guys, had this very specific plan to arrive, because although there was a Chinese Exclusion Act, there were some exclusions to the Exclusion Act. One was if you're a merchant, you could come in. So they had actually collected the paperwork to show that they were setting up a company in Cleveland, and they were setting up this company. The 3 of them were going to do it. One of them was getting married to a woman there, a Chinese American woman there, and that was the beginning of their life. They had a shop. They'd sort of invested in a shop together, and the 2 that died of the 8 were his 2 partners.
Yeah.
And so a day after they arrive in New York, he doesn't get to go to Cleveland. He's back in shipping for 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, I mean, like I said, I think the overarching themes of, and there's so much to like extrapolate and talk about like bigger topics that like can relate to us modern day as well. Yeah, but one was just like, you know, about the sinking of the Titanic itself, which is interesting enough, right? And you kind of try to recreate what might have happened to them. How did they survive? But yeah, I mean, the bigger part of the documentary that was so fascinating was really just like investigating, like chasing down leads on these survivors, right? And trying to dig up through investigating what their life might have looked like through these historical accounts, through talking to family members. And I love towards the end, again, I know I'm giving away too much, but like towards the end of the documentary, it's like what really puts things into perspective is that this was just like one bump in the road for them, the sinking of the Titanic, right? And usually, because it's such a big historical event, if someone is in any way associated with the sinking of the Titanic, whether they be a survivor or a family member of a survivor, it's like it almost kind of defines them. Yeah. Right? Because it's such a big historical event. Like, that is you. And we think, oh, well, that will be like the biggest trauma in your life. And when you find out more and more about these Chinese survivors, you realize it was kind of just the beginning. Yeah. It was just one bump in the road of a really struggled life. Yeah. Of going through a lot of hardships that is not uncommon for many immigrants of that era, obviously, to go through. But it just puts things into perspective where even when you guys, you know, when you guys visit the village of Taisan, right, and you talk to the locals there, and you mentioned Titanic, they're not like, oh, Titanic. They're like, oh, like the American boat that sank. Like, it's just one shipwreck to them of many shipwrecks throughout history.
Yeah, I mean, the family knew that he'd been on, the sort of family legend was he'd been in a shipwreck. Actually, they thought it was a French shipwreck. They thought he'd sunk off France. I mean, that might be a misunderstanding because Titanic actually did go UK to France and then to there's a little kink in the journey. They go to France and Ireland and then they go off to America. It's not the straight journey we sometimes imagine. Some historian said to us, you got to remember that for many people on Titanic, especially the steerage, the third class passengers who were being sent off to a work, you know, some job over in the US or were on a route to somewhere else. Even when the ship went down and they got rescued or, you know, and picked up and they were in New York, they didn't know they were on Titanic. Yeah. It's not they don't know it's a famous thing. It's just this incredibly traumatic experience they've just been. They don't know Titanic's not the legend that it is for us yet. Yeah. And probably even more so if you were Chinese and literally you had like last minute tickets bought for you, you're going to go and work in shipping anyway. It's another ship. Shipwrecks were fairly common at that point. Obviously not on the scale of Titanic, but to go under is a dangerous profession. The sailors died at a very high rate. Especially Chinese sailors were in like the grimmest of jobs. They called them firemen. They were down in the engine rooms, often shoveling coal, and that kind of thing. They often did not speak great English, or even if they did, they weren't up on the decks hearing a lot of information. So they were sort of really kept in their own little bubble and weren't exposed to all of that stuff. So the idea that they disappeared after Titanic doesn't even require them to be like, I don't want to talk about that. It could just be that almost immediately they've got another challenge coming up.
Exactly.
And that, they're all sending money home and they're all doing, there's so many things going on. They were in this horrible event. I'm sure it was deeply traumatic. I'm sure they probably had what we would call now PTSD, something like that. But I mean, within 3 years of Titanic, 2-3 years of Titanic, we know that several of them had already been sent back to Europe or had chosen to go back to Europe and were working on merchant naval vessels in the First World War with like German U-boats all over the place.
Yeah, that's why
it's insane.
I remember watching that; it was blowing my mind because my first initial reaction after they got to port in America and then they were denied entry and they were shipped over to Cuba.
Yeah,
and then later on, some of the other characters besides Fan Lang were, like you said, were going on with other ships. And my first reaction was, Jesus, you're still on ships?
I know.
That trauma is so intense. You're still on ships. But going back to what Justin was saying, it was just another bump in the road in terms of their life.
Yeah.
And they have to move on. And to me, one of the things that was just insane about the film, because I totally appreciate it, I loved it as well, is that there's a lot of underlying context that I did not expect to face when watching the film. In particular was what was brought up. It was like the China Exclusion Act and how important racism in general was an underlying factor in telling this story that I did not expect. I was just thinking, the journey of these survivors, and I'm sure a lot of people thought that. Then all of a sudden, wait a minute, this is a lot deeper than I thought. And the first thing that Justin and I kind of said when we were talking about the film together was how it connects to what modern society is kind of going through right now.
Yeah.
And it's a bit, I don't know, it's just I feel very uncomfortable about it.
It's just like history repeating itself.
It is repeating, and the same theme. So it's like, I think if you were just born yesterday, you might think that issues of like excluding people from a country are incredibly new, and somebody just made it up, and it's like a crazy thing. I mean, one of the ironies about this is that in the film, there are a couple of shots of people on the streets in New York actually protesting about limits on immigration. And a lot of people will say, it's to do with a dispute between China and the US. Actually, ironically, it isn't, because when we were cutting the film, this is not post-COVID. We were cutting the film pre-COVID. So there weren't like anti-Asian or protests against anti-Asian violence, for example. That hadn't happened yet. But when people look at the film, when it came out, it was now post-COVID. And so people are like, the anti-Asian hate marches you put in the film is really powerful. They're not that. What they are is, and this is a weird thing, again, a kind of coincidence, they were the anti-Muslim ban. Trump policies had just come in. That's what those protests are that we put in the film. And because it's New York, randomly, there are ethnically Chinese people there protesting about a Muslim ban. Do you know what I mean? So it's like... Yeah. We just pick random footage to show the idea of people protesting about anti-particular nations or an ethnic group. And because it's New York, there are people from everywhere, including Chinese-looking people in the shot. And then people assume that it's all about China again. It wasn't. It was about a Muslim ban. And it was about New Yorkers getting on the street and saying, you can't ban people just because they're from a certain country. It's kind of insane. Like, the parallels are so crazy. It just goes so deep. I mean, there were other things in the story that are super historical and about their moment. But even then you think the effect of this is back in 1912. It's a moment of like history, it's gone. But then one of our challenges, I said already, was we felt we had to find at least one descendant, like a good descent we could tell our story and really work it out. And maybe some of the others we'd find relatives, but we had to have one really clear central story. But within a few months, we started to realize there was a problem, which was, I mean, it's obvious. There's like 6 survivors. They're obviously going to have kids. I mean, what's the chances? But then when we looked at the stats, Chinese men, and it was 90% or 95% male Chinese who ended up in America, because they actually literally banned women. Even the areas like you could be a merchant, a scholar, you could still come. They wouldn't allow Chinese workers in. But they were all men they were talking about. They wouldn't let women in at all. Basically no Chinese women allowed in. So
Was this both Canada and America?
they had different policies. In America, it was an exclusion act, so a complete ban with the exceptions that we said. In Canada, they had what was called a head tax. So you could come in, but you had to pay this incredibly punitive fee.
It was a
So they just made a real high barrier to entry. But here's the thing. Even when they got into America, depending on which state they were in, there were anti-miscegenation laws that meant that they couldn't marry white women.
Oh, shit.
So there are no Chinese women, and in many parts of America, you either can't marry white women because of a local law, or there's a lot of prejudice about that. So most white families wouldn't have allowed their daughter, to marry a Chinese guy at that point. So did they actually have any kids? Is it possible the 6 Chinese guys who were on Titanic not only went through Titanic, but then had no descendants at all? That happened to so many families. Such a huge percent of the guys who went over to the US at that point are the final link in their family. So there was a very good chance they wouldn't have any descendants. And that would make them really unique as well. To have 6 people who are all young and of the age to get married and have kids, and none of them have kids. We only have evidence, direct evidence, that one of them had kids. It's possible Li Bing did. And we did find relatives of the other ones, but they weren't direct line relatives. They were cousins and that kind of thing. And that's a direct result of the Chinese Exclusion Act and anti-miscegenation laws in the US, where they could land and be there maybe if they got around the law, but then there were no women.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And the parallels are so stark to today as well, because if you listen to the rhetoric back then, what this was like the late 1800s and the first half of the 1900s with the Chinese Exclusion Acts, the rhetoric and the bans on Chinese was kind of the same things you're hearing now as well.
Exactly
Like they're taking our jobs, like this invasion of Chinese people.
Disease was another big one. They're a particular vector for disease. Crime was a big thing. Yeah, exactly. It was
it's
all
like the
exactly
same rhetoric
same
you're
things.
hearing now. Again, it's like history repeating itself. And you don't know until you can pull back and actually understand earlier history. Otherwise, most of us who were born much later than that, we just have no idea.
We spent a couple of days in the Chinatown in Manhattan to meet a little community of kind of sort of vaguely activist Chinese Americans who were there and they have a community group and there's a church there and they get together and they do some, especially during COVID, they were in the run up to COVID, COVID had started and there was a lot of pushback against a lot of the violence that was on the streets and the prejudice that was happening. But they're super kind of engaged people. And there's a guy called Corky Lee, who's kind of famous in Manhattan. He was a photographer and a kind of activist and a center of that community. And we got in touch with him and then another woman called Shirley Young. And together they helped us to put together this group because I really wanted to go there and then just meet people, not that who are descendants, but just hear their story, like have a way to do it. And there's a little moment in the film, like 2/3 of the way in, where we just sit down with this list of like Manhattan-based ethnically Chinese people and get their stories. And it was unbelievable. We had more tears on that day than on any other day. Yeah. And it was crazy stuff. And it was usually to do with, I grew up and my dad and my uncle didn't speak and I never knew why. And then it turned out it was because my dad had agreed to change the family name and my uncle got really angry about it. And then we'd gotten a fight and someone pulled a gun and it was like, and I had this theory in the film that you can't have a trauma like Titanic and then it not cause like generational trauma that lasts somehow, that like plays out in families.
Like the ripple effect.
Yeah, the ripple of it. There has to be something. I guess wealth probably protects you a little bit from that if you just leave it and it's like, oh, it's terrible, but I'm going to move on and I'm going to carry on being rich and doing my life. But if you're poor or if you're disadvantaged, what happened to Feng Long is such a trauma that people would say, why didn't you just tell his son? It's so crazy. Why wouldn't you just tell your son? There's so many reasons why they didn't tell the kids anything. Because I think my theory is that he and maybe some of the other survivors, for them, Titanic was, first of all, there's a tradition, which I used to think was very Chinese, but I actually have done some sort of European history things where that generation, they thought it was like bad luck to tell these stories to their kids. Like bad things that happened to me when I was a kid. I'm not going to tell the kids because I don't want them to get upset. So they would avoid the upset of family. They just wouldn't talk about it. Yeah. But in their case, it's even worse because Titanic itself, if Feng Long ever says I was on Titanic, then he has to say he's Feng Long. I mean, if Feng Wing's son says he was, then he has to say they was lying.
Then he has to reveal his
to
old
reveal
identity. Yeah.
But hold on.
And that's just not just about him. He's revealing other people's identity.
But okay, so he was born in what, 1890?
Yeah, somewhere
so he
there.
was on Titanic at 22?
We think he was, I think the date we had was 94, would have made him 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if he was 18 and then
He'd written his age, I think, as 26 or 32.
Yeah.
I
So
think.
anyways, he was like 18 or 20.
Yeah.
And then was he like 65, 70 when he had his son?
65.
65.
He had 2 sons. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, imagine like, something that happened to you when you were 18, right? Something traumatic. And then you went through all these different life experiences, and like you finally got to a point where like you had a life. And this is now almost 50 years later.
Yeah.
Would you talk about it? Like, even if it
Not
was something
necessarily,
normal, like my dad doesn't necessarily tell me about what happened 50 years ago anyways, right? And so you can imagine he's reinvented. There's a billion different reasons that totally make sense. But just, I think the time that's elapsed is probably one of the biggest reasons. It didn't just happen yesterday.
But I think there's a lot of secrets that get like covered in scar tissue.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like they're written. It's like, I can't talk about that because it's traumatic, and I don't want to reveal that, and it's troubling for me and it upsets me. But also, I've layered it up with so much protection that a lot of the people said that, when they change family names, like the Paper Sons things, where people sort of bought an identity or were given an identity to come into the US to pretend to be someone else's son. They weren't, but they often bought them or they were gifted them by someone. You're already, lying's the wrong word, but you're already hiding your identity within that. And then you wouldn't tell your kids because you worried that your 6-year-old son in kindergarten might tell his classmate, and then you get revealed.
Yeah.
And then your whole status in that country, then the life that you built is in jeopardy now.
You threw it all away. I mean, a very good friend of mine said to me that they had grown. In fact, this is David Lee. He's in one of the cuts of the film. He was a researcher for us in Taishan. An older gentleman, incredibly, just a lovely guy. Lived in Beijing for a long time, but grew up in the U.S. Went there as a kid, and he's called David Lee. But David told me that when he was, this is not that long ago, maybe a decade or 2 ago, he found out he's not a Lee, he's a Wang. His whole story of his family is completely fake. No. I mean, he was told he was related to this person. It was not. Yeah. He wasn't related to that person. He was actually related to this other person who was playing a family friend. And there were people who would be married in China, and then somebody would get their wife over to the US, and they're planning to get over later by pretending their wife was married to their friend. So their actual wife would go over to the US and live as somebody else's wife on the surface. And it's your wife, and then you don't get to go over for another 10. I mean, it's insane, the stuff that they had to do.
Yeah, just any loophole they can find in the bureaucracy of it all, and try to get in, right?
Yeah, and there was an amnesty in the I'm forgetting the decade. It was I think it was mid 50s, mid 60s. There was an amnesty. I think it was connected to the civil rights movement, where it was kind of acknowledged. Listen, we made you guys do this. This is not your fault. But if you come clean and you tell us the story, we'll do the paperwork and we'll allow you to get citizenship. And some of them did. And Folong did. That's what he did. He got amnesty. He admitted he'd been undocumented for 30 plus years. But how much trust are they going to have in that system? That's crazy.
I'd be like, oh no, I still wouldn't come forward.
It's happening right now.
That's right.
It's happening right now. And then, given all the scary things that are happening, that's why people are staying, they're staying low, right? And then in this particular case, the other piece is he reinvented himself.
Yeah.
So like if you've reinvented yourself, you changed your last name, you're Howie Wong now, right? You're Justin Lee. Of course you're not going to go back because you've actually moved on and you reinvented yourself. And like a lot of the skeletons in the closet, like, and then of course, again, the age thing, like, I mean, he's like 70, like by the time his son could understand, he'd be like 75 or 80.
Yeah. He was, Tom said by the time they could have a conversation, his dad was like in his 80s. I mean, he's so much older. And his dad wanted to get married. There's no record of any previous relationships. We have a lot of paperwork. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't have a girlfriend or something like that, but he didn't have any open relationship that anyone who knew him knew about until the point when at age like 64, he married like a 22-year-old who was sent over from Taishan. I mean, it's not an ideal situation. It's not something that, you would go, and I'm incredibly proud to do this. I don't imagine he was. And that marriage faltered and ended incredibly quickly. And they had a very difficult divorce. You could find the records of the divorce, like in paperwork.
I mean, can you imagine, like we grew up in modern times, right? And even so, like we've talked about this in previous shows where it wasn't like we were, the class, like the class sort of president, whatever. And like dating whoever we wanted, you know? And then imagine like this guy years and years and years before. I mean, he's like a nobody.
Yeah.
Like he's ostracized.
Yeah.
You know, it's and he doesn't probably have a whole lot of money. I mean, he can't like even.
He was working as a
He
waiter.
could go decades without even like having female contact.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
that's right. And there weren't many women in the Chinatowns. He was in Chicago, and then he was in Milwaukee fairly early on. And you can find the records. I think the painful thing to read is that, and I don't know if this is painful or not, but the way I read it is he's an incredibly ambitious man. Like he really wants to succeed. Like
He was
he's
always
more
wearing
than
a
the
suit
others.
and tie. Right?
Always.
Yeah.
But he goes from opening like 3, 4, 5 companies in a row in the 20s and 30s under different names, aliases, and doing it. Every one of them fails. But you can understand why. I mean, he can't even properly file his taxes or things because he doesn't have any paperwork. He's constantly hiding who he is and getting people to help him out. He's always owing people favors. He's living in shitty little apartments with no prospects. You know, really trying his hardest, but trying to maintain his dignity. And
It's amazing that he's doing that. It's like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's
Even
why
if you try to start, I've never tried to start a business.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
Well, to the point that you were making in terms of like it's not surprising, like he wouldn't even tell his son that he was a survivor of the Titanic. Yeah, it's not surprising to me either. On 2 points. One point is even war veterans who come back. You know, a lot of them don't like to talk ever
PTSD.
about their time
that's
in
right.
combat, right?
Yeah.
Even ones that don't necessarily have PTSD, they just don't like to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
It's not like a happy memory for them to
No.
talk about. So
No.
they bury that stuff deep, and a
Yeah.
lot of their children don't even really know the details of what really happened over
Yeah.
there. So that's not uncommon, one.
Yeah.
Number two, like I think the point I was making before, when you start, through this documentary, when you start learning a little bit more about Feng Lung's life, the sinking of the Titanic was, again, just like one hurdle that he had to jump across amongst a whole life of hurdles. So to him, I don't think it might have not even necessarily have been this one standout moment, because his whole life was kind of like struggling and surviving. So to him, like, there was a million stories he could have told, and
It's
not
nothing-
just,
it's-
and
yeah.
it wasn't dominated
It's not
by this
spectacular for
event
him.
of Titanic. Yeah,
Yeah,
That's right.
totally.
Although
It's
he
like-
must have grown up being aware it would turn up. There was a very famous film called A Night to Remember, came out I think in the 1950s. It was big Hollywood. I think it was a British Hollywood production, and it was huge. He must have been aware that it was being talked about and never bring it up. I think one
He's
of
like, too many people know about this. I got to be quiet.
a pre-amnesty, he
Yeah.
must have definitely, even post-amnesty. So because he didn't tell them the story of Titanic in the amnesty claim. We've seen the paperwork. He didn't mention
Yeah.
it. So he's clearly got rid of that. So he did not want to hint that back in 1912 he was trying to get into the US. He'd come over on Titanic as a seaman, but he was trying to get in. He didn't want to bring that up. He never mentioned that. But 3 generations later, his granddaughter Samantha, who's Tom's daughter, she told us a story. She was very nervous, and we didn't end up using it in the film. Such a sweet little girl. And she told us a story where she had been in class and Titanic had come up, and they had a whole class on Titanic, and she didn't dare tell anyone. It's a whole class on it. Her grandfather was on Titanic. By that point, we knew. And she didn't tell him.
Yeah.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah.
That she can't even tell them, oh, this thing we're doing in class, I'm the only one in class who has an actual relative, a direct ancestor who was on Titanic, and she couldn't tell him. It's incredibly sad. Like that's really sad that they couldn't do that.
It really is.
What also is insane is the fact that this is a window into the lives of many people. Like I think about the railroads, right? So you just like
this is
First-
just one story.
there's one story of many when you think about Chinese people. But then what about Japanese people? What about Korean people? What about immigrants throughout the history of time and the Roman Empire, And it's just like, I mean, human existence is a fucking struggle. It's a tragedy. It's a motherfucking big ass tragedy.
Yeah, it's been a real struggle for most people up until very recently.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there's no one struggling now. Of course there are. But on the whole, it's a whole different order of struggle in the past than it is generally today across the world, right?
We got
Poses
no
different
struggles,
questions.
man. We got nothing.
Yeah, but which poses different problems, I think, for the next generation.
yeah.
We're going to be heading into new struggles. Don't worry.
Back then, that
But you're
generation,
not
they
fucking
were
holding on to a corpse like
they
trying to
felt-
float
yeah.
in water.
Yeah,
and
it's
shit.
I mean, they
Like,
were-
you know,
they were-
I mean,
they were
that's
as
The
tough
closest
as
thing we
nails.
went through is the lockdown. That was like
that's
the
dude,
closest
That's
thing.
not even.
I know. I'm saying that's
I
the
would not
closest.
even put them. I'm not even going to connect proximity to the lockdown. Like to me, it's not even You know what I'm saying? There's
yeah.
not even an element of proximity. They're
Yeah.
two completely unrelated things.
But here's the thing that I don't know if you feel the same way, but sometimes I question the authenticity of history, and I mean, who knows? 50 years later, 60 years later, people talk about COVID-19 and the lockdowns, and people
absolutely.
and the stories that come out are the deaths and all the horrible shit that we did not personally go through, but maybe those
No, it's
stories
already
come
come
to light.
out.
But what I'm saying is that it's going to be amplified even more eventually.
It's funny. Somebody said to me, they said, and this is like, obviously it's not the same thing, but somebody said, "Oh, it's funny you choose this story to make when you were an immigrant in China." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird." I don't think about it. Obviously, there's no comparison between me and a guy who was in Titanic.
Yeah.
But I was like, "Oh, that is interesting because it is a way of like talking about identity." I mean, one of the things people would say is they'd say, "Well, you complain about Chinese Exclusion Act, but I mean, can you even immigrate to China now? Oh, it's so unfair to the Chinese yen. But what about you now? You can't immigrate to China." But the difference, I think, is that America was set up on the tradition of being a country that accepted immigrants. So this was a breaking of the principle. China, Japan, Korea, East Asian nations have never accepted immigrants in that way.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of superficial things, right? Like that's the thing that people like to draw is like on a very, very superficial lens. There's some parallel you can draw, but they're actually they're not related, right?
Yeah.
And then in terms of this exclusion piece, I think there are many ways that you could refute that, but one would be that foreigners are not vilified.
That's right.
Right? They're not vilified, and you can travel here on business and legitimate reasons. There's all different ways you can travel. Exclusion, and I was thinking about this earlier, is just a euphemism. It's like, get the fuck out of my country. I mean, it's exclusion my ass. It's like, fuck off policy.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a completely
with
racist.
with all the media narratives to justify the Exclusion
Yeah.
Act in the first place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It comes with a whole storm and things. It's not just, oh, here's a bill or law we passed. It's everything also leading up to that and after that help justify and tell the public, oh, this is a good thing we're doing. Believe this.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Well,
all
I
that
think
that
it's
comes with
like
it.
it's like when you say I'm not racist, but it's like when you say the thing that's like you're saying, hey, listen, I don't want to be, but the fact is that these guys are like this, and so it's very like the story of the guys in Titanic and arriving in the US is very much, I don't want to say a bad thing, but these guys were like, they're really crazy. They like stole seats from women and children. Can you believe they would do that? We would never do that. It's funny because when we went through the Titanic literature, what doesn't get mentioned is just the there's a huge amount of writing at that time that just, you don't even mention it's racist, but it's just deeply racist.
Yeah.
Like some of the famous books about Titanic written at the time by some witnesses. There's a famous book written by a woman and it's called The Woman's Story or something like that. And it's one of the women survivors. She's talking about Titanic. It's actually a pamphlet. It's like 11, 12 sides long, but it was quite famous at the time. Well, because it was like a story of how women survived and so some women were heroes because they kind of saved their kids and they saved other people's kids and then they watched their husbands die and it was deeply traumatic. And that's how that pamphlet is remembered if you look it up. What is not mentioned that in that pamphlet several times, it says where she's talking about how there were heroes on board, women and men. She says, I speak, of course, of the Anglo-Saxon passengers on board. Of the others, we cannot say these things. So, I mean, this is unbelievable. Her view is that genuinely there's like this race of people who have like a higher level of morality. And the other ones, I'm not going to talk about them because we all know the kind of stuff they got up to. It definitely wasn't what we would have done. We'd never have done that. Yeah. And what's crazy about it is that, I mean, you could say, well, a lot of the, foreigners on board, non-Anglo-Saxon, if you want to put it that way, non-white European Americans, they were poorer, whatever, they had different. But actually, it's not even like trying to find excuses. The things that were said about them are just not true. They're just not true. I mean, there's no evidence that any man on board stole a seat of a woman or child. Not even not the Chinese guys. There's no evidence that anyone did that. And there's a simple fact that if you state this fact, then you undermine the whole argument, which is not a single lifeboat left Titanic with all its seats full. So then there's no stealing of seats because they all had empty seats. You just didn't put people in the seats. So you're saying a man who got in is just evil because he wanted to live? Even if he wasn't taking someone's seat? I mean, you can make the case that if he took someone's seat, he's not in that moment, he wasn't being a big hero. Although I understand panic and fear, of course. But no one actually took anyone's seat because all the lifeboats left.
There were still seats in the lifeboat.
In all the lifeboats. in every lifeboat. And some of the lifeboats left they left the Titanic less than half full.
Yeah, that's a huge tragedy.
That's the crime of it. And I always say this. I said, when we look at Titanic, it is insane that a lifeboat that went down in what, we would call the Edwardian era in England, we still judge it on Edwardian values. Like, men are just meant to die because that's what you're meant to do when a tragedy happens. It expresses your heroism, even if you die for no reason at all. It's crazy. We do not, and I've said this many times, but it's like, for me, it's very visceral. Early on, I was like, why do we make different rules up for Titanic? We say women and children first, as if it's a rule. What other example can you give me of a disaster where we use that phrase? We say it like it's a famous thing. Famous from what? Except Titanic. I'm not saying you shouldn't look after kids. The women thing is a bit more complicated, for obvious reasons, but of course we save kids. But we do it as if it's like a rule. Oh, crazy, those villains on board. We don't live with. Where's that rule? Like, there are planes that go down where people go nuts in the passenger area and they're screaming and stuff. We don't go, couldn't they die more gracefully? Can you imagine how obscene it is to say that? This is a massive act of government and corporate negligence where thousands of people died, and we're squabbling about which passengers were not as good as they're meant to be. It's obscene. It's like an obscene telling of the story, this occurred to me while we were making it. I was like, this whole story is completely obscene, and it's not what happened. Obviously, that's terrible. It's an accident. But it's the fact that we keep telling these stories about people on board as if they're somehow villains for being panicked and trying to
we're reinterpreting over and over and over some of the bias, right? And it's an incredible story of just, because it's such a tragedy, it's an incredible story of just like human nature and the human lens, right? But not just the human nature of the people that were on board, but it more so tells us about like who we are as the observers, as the watchers.
Well, it's always so easy to judge when you're in safety and you can just watch from afar or through history, through time.
Yeah, we should only watch the movie in like 14 degree, 12 degree water.
That's right.
and then have our judgments.
I don't think people
criticize.
even have, there's that whole debate now that's kind of trendy in the podcast, online world. But I mean, philosophers have talked about it, whether we even have any free will. Was anybody on board who was screaming and going nuts and trying to take it? But they won't make a decision about that. They're going insane. It's incredibly scary.
Yeah.
They're not choosing to be a bad person.
Everyone's just trying to get out.
That's right.
Well, people aren't even necessarily in that situation. Most people aren't even making like necessarily conscious decisions. They're just reacting.
Yeah. And if you're not, and you're standing there, which many men did, to be fair, stood there and watched the lifeboats go down and died. They just literally died. It's an incredibly stoic thing to do. But they're still at the mercy of social pressures of that time. That's because men were expected to do that. A certain type of man defined himself that way. And if he didn't do it, he would think that his life was worthless. The fear of being seen that way was greater than the fear of dying.
And you don't know what you would do. And I think one of the main reasons is that we don't experience this. Like, I actually don't know what I would do in that moment.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't, because I don't experience it. I'm not in that life or death situation.
Eric would be pushing everybody out of those way. He would be kicking people off of the lifeboat and be like, no, this is my boat. No one on here but
There are
me.
empty seats, but I need more seats for me.
I need more seats.
Yeah, and the funny thing, the irony is that, if this happened to you more than once, you might behave differently in different situations. You just don't know.
Yeah. It is weird. But I do think it's really interesting, this issue of taking, to widen it out a little bit, like the issue of taking like a big story that we all share because it's like universal or the whole world knows a story, and then trying to work out the mythology that's accrued around it, and then try to unpack it a little bit and see how it ended up being told that way. And it's often for incredibly random reasons that don't necessarily have much to do with the evidence or the original thing. It says more about the time that the story is being told in. So of course people thought the Chinese guys did bad things because that was the story about Chinese people at that time. That's the myth and then it gets self-perpetuating, and then they don't come forward because they're afraid, and the press didn't even look for them. I mean, some think 1912, it's a different era, that they didn't have the same sense. They had an incredibly free press at that point. There were really rabid journalists racing out all over the place, and they were reporting like Hollywood scandals and all crazy stuff. I mean, no one went to look for them. No one went to
lack
interview
of
them.
humanity. Right? And it's just a sign of the times.
Yeah.
So I guess pulling out a little bit of the film world, I mean, just to kind of get to know you in terms of, life, we talked about Fang Long and his incredible journey in life.
What was your old name?
I thought you were going to ask me like all the lies I've told. What are my secrets?
What's your
and lies?
real identity here in China?
Well,
what were you before?
Joking aside, I am another person because I'm Luo Fei. I mean, in the film industry here, people know me as Luo Fei, and now I have the podcast, and so it is kind of funny to have another name. It's like a different person that you function. I mean, you guys, I'm sure, have the same. You know, you have friends who know you only by this other name.
You've been here how long now?
Now I'm trying to diminish it because it seems embarrassingly long. For a while I was pushing it up, but I think it's like 27, 28 years now.
Yeah. Wow.
Embarrassingly long. What's embarrassing?
Do you go through these things, guys, where I remember on the run up to 10 years, I think I had like 7, and I was telling people, oh, it's like 10 years because I felt like it was cooler to be 10 than 7. Yeah. And I remember that it was like, I don't know.
It's like your age or something. You want to downplay your age.
I think I got to like 18 years and I kept telling people it was 15 because by that point I was like, this is getting embarrassing. It's like,
why is it embarrassing though?
It's like, what?
Number's too big.
The number's too big now. So now I'm trying to tell people it's 20.
I kind of get it though. I kind of get it though.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, what's happening here?
Well, why would you be embarrassed?
I don't know.
Well, maybe embarrassed isn't even the right word.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, maybe it's not embarrassed. Well, maybe it is. I don't know what it is. But I do find myself now because I've been here for 18 years, 17 to 18
years. So are you saying 15 or 20 now?
I'm always honest.
You just say 18?
I don't hide it, yeah. I go direct. And I mean, even with my age, everything, I just let it out. But now I'll say the time and I'll look for their reaction. Because I'll get reactions now. I'll be like, you've been here for that long? And I'm like, yeah, well, is there something wrong with that? Because all of a sudden you start questioning, like, is there something wrong with that? Yeah. That's all it is. It's kind of an innocent reaction in terms of how I feel about it. It's not like I feel embarrassed about it.
I think it's a measure. Maybe it's something for where I'm sensitive to the issue because I think I sometimes think about my family back in England and I think I've been away for so long. Why have I done that? Like, what's going on there? Like, I know some people are away for a long time because they have a troubled family relationship and there's no need to be close or it's better to be further. I don't have that. I love my family. And
how often do you go back?
Now more. Now I'm back probably recently every couple of months. But I mean, standardly over the last few years, maybe twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. But I feel I have to get, my parents are a little older. My son is back in London now studying. He's 19. So I want to go back more. But sometimes I think to myself, what am I doing here? Like, I think it's to do with work and my interest and fascination. But I think if you stay where you were, you don't question it. You just carry on doing something. A friend of mine said that I think it really expressed a truth about this. He wrote a book about his experience living in China. And in that book, he used a phrase, which I don't remember exactly, but he said basically, a lot of people say, oh my God, you must be so brave being away from home for that long. And he said, I think it's the opposite. I think I'm too much of a coward to go back because you have to kind of rephase life. You have to kind of restart on the terms that you began life. It's the people you knew. You're set in stone there. It's who you are. When you're away from it, there's a kind of, these are probably too black and white, these terms, but there's a kind of a little bit of like, I go back, but here I'm this and I'm this and I do this. If I go back, I don't want to start again.
There's also this angle though, like what you said, Arthur. I think when you grow up somewhere, you don't really have a chance to like build your life the way you kind of wanted it. You just existed in that place and you are who you are and who the community sees you as and your family, and you were just born into it and grew up that way. Whereas when we moved to a different country, we kind of started this new life and we could kind of like just build it how we wanted it to be. Yeah. Right? We have this new identity. We can be anybody here. So when you go back, you're kind of leaving that and you're going back to a place seemingly where you didn't have the chance to build that and you don't really have that much control over who you are. And hence maybe like going back to a place where you just feel more vulnerable or less in control of your life in a way.
But what's interesting is that I feel like you have fully ingrained yourself to this culture and society, not only creating films about, Chinese people and stuff like that, but also your podcast, you're doing it all in Chinese.
Yeah, that's impressive.
The podcast was a big thing because when Paul Wade and I originally came up with the idea for the show, we called it The Overshare. And but we didn't call it that in Chinese. We called it the overshare. We thought it was like a funny thing because we joke about the fact that we overshare. Like I've probably done a bit today where you like, we say, in Chinese, we always say, what's our show? Oh, it's 两个中年的男人暴露自己的弱点. It's like that. And just the whole show is just us exposing our terrible soft bellies and all of our weaknesses. That's the whole idea. So we called it the overshare, and we did it in English, and we did like 8 episodes. But I think we both kind of acknowledged fairly early on that the ultimate aim was we felt like we wanted to move into being the Chinese world, that we wanted to make it something that I want to be functioning in a world where we're talking to Chinese people around us. And that's where it felt really important to try to do that. But we were super scared about doing it. I mean, none of our Chinese is perfect. So it was like we had to like try to do that and stumble and see if we could make that, work. And of course, I still have doubts now.
I also think it's resonating with your fans. I mean, it seems like you have a lot of conversations in the comment section with your fans. And I think you're doing a great job. And it just shows that you said that you're a bit fearful using Chinese at first, maybe a little embarrassed, or you feel like you're not perfect enough, but you just do it. Yeah. You make it work. You make it happen.
Well, also we laugh about it, which is helpful. Like the people are constantly laughing. And I mean, we were talking about like, it came up in the show about who has the better Chinese, and Paul actually properly studied Chinese, and he's done it. I mean, he's great. So I'm more somebody that kind of, sort of self-taught in Chinese, so I have weaknesses in my Chinese. But what I'm glad about is it's become kind of fun and part of the joke of the show. It's not like I'm hiding it. You know what I mean? Like that weakness is part.
You use it as a strength of the show. It's a comedic relief.
Kind of a fun thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Which makes me want to make a comment, and I'd be really interested in terms of what you might have to say about it. I feel like it is a little bit of a privilege for you, in the sense that. I think when people look, this could all be in my head, right? Yeah. And how true is it? I don't know, but this is one of my things that I'm self-conscious about, is that when people look at me, I'm Chinese facing, I'm ethnically Chinese, I identify as being Chinese. And so when I speak less than fluent Chinese, it becomes embarrassing. Yeah. Just like how you're embarrassed about, like how long you've been here or whatever. Like I'm embarrassed that my Chinese isn't absolutely fluent. And so, and then to a lot of people who may not know me, if I'm just on the street talking to people or even on a podcast who are watching a video, let's say, they might not know I grew up in America. And the fact that I'm speaking less than fluent Chinese is at first like kind of like sometimes they get off put. They're like it's kind of weird, right? Before they figure out, I didn't grow up here. So there is that embarrassment factor. Whereas for you, when people look at you, I imagine that any bit of Chinese you can speak, no matter how good you can speak it, and you can speak it really well. But even if you couldn't speak it really well, even if you could speak it 50% at the level you speak it now, people will still be impressed with you.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
It's really funny before you answer, on our Xiaohongshu, we pretty much every other video or something, you'll see some random person that's not a follower that just found our video, and they'll leave a comment or write us like a private message, be like, 为什么3个中国人不讲中文？为什么装逼啊？用英文来讲？
Yeah, like angry. Like that
like, 装什么逼啊？
Like that. They accuse us of like pretending to not be Chinese.
Yeah, like we're showing off our English or something.
要装上你不是中国人 like we're pretending not to be, right?
We're like, no, 我们的中文很烂。
No.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. I mean, if somebody needs to make I think the people who are ethnically Chinese and come back to China, I think, is a fascinating subject, like a deeply fascinating subject. And I don't think it's really been explored. Like, hasn't been explored on film, I think, in a super... I mean, maybe it has, maybe I've missed. I think it's a super interesting subject.
I agree.
I loved when we were making The Six that we were filming families who were, like, ethnically... I mean, Tom, for example, speaks a kind of... he speaks Taishanese. He doesn't really speak Cantonese very well, although he runs a restaurant where they have a lot of customers who speak Cantonese. So... I'm fascinated by this. My answer to that is I think you're exactly right. And it is a weird privilege. But my only thing I'd say about privilege is as soon as you become aware of privilege, it loses all of its inherent meaning. And so you're constantly doing the maths to cancel it out in your head. And that in itself is not, I'm not a victim of that. But you obviously, anybody who's self-aware enough is constantly believing that anything that's said that's good about you isn't true because they're just saying it to be nice. So there's that constant maths going on in my head, which is, they said a nice thing, but of course they don't mean it. They said a nice thing, but they don't mean it.
Yeah.
And there's the other thing, which I think is part of privilege. I mean, I always say, this is not me making it, this is a cliche, it's a truism, but feminism was good for men as well as women. I don't think it's good to be held on a pedestal. It's not good for you, like mental health wise. It's not, of course you're not suffering and you're not a victim of the situation, but it's not a comfortable situation. It's much nicer to be around people who you feel you're on a level with and you're a fellow human, able to respond in a human way. And you having unearned privilege is not a comfortable situation. I mean, maybe some people love it. I don't like it at all. I like it when I disappear. And as a filmmaker, if I'm in a room and I sense, and it's almost a visceral feeling at some point, if I'm filming like I was in the school with these bunch of kids who are like super interested in foreigners for like 5 minutes because they haven't met a foreigner or they've very rarely seen a foreigner, they're just on TV. But that moment when 10 minutes in, they're just like every other kid and they're bored because you're just a middle-aged guy in the room, they don't care if you're Chinese, is incredibly, I don't know, I love it.
Yeah.
Like, that feeling I really love. I used to love it. I used to drive in Shanghai. I don't have a car anymore, but I used to drive for years, like 15 years. And I loved it when I'd be at a junction somewhere and some guy would hit his horn next to me, boop, boop, and I'd roll the window down. He's like, hey, 师傅, 复兴中了这么早. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm just a driver.
You're just a local here, yeah.
And sometimes people, they would see and then be like, oh, boys. And then,
Boys.
oh, boys. As if I'm driving a car, but I can't speak any Chinese. That would be weird. But I was used to that. But when they didn't say anything, I just loved it.
Oh, I get it. Oh, yeah.
Like
for
that's
sure.
just like being, because it's only satisfying for so long to just be held in that position where you're just like a different thing. And feeling different is not a comfortable feeling. I'm sure some people short term, and we know, of course, that people use privilege in all sorts of ways to get advantages in different ways. They're exotic in one country or in another or whatever. Or, the classic one to say is that like people are top of these days, people love to talk about people who are top of the dating pool, the dating poll or whatever, just because you're default, somebody is more interesting to a local population or whatever, when it works in different ways in different places. But ultimately, I don't like that feeling. I don't like it. So it doesn't feel like I've earned any of it, like when that's what happens.
Privilege, I think, is like you're given something that other people don't have, and then you like bitch about it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, you do a Chinese language podcast and then you don't get a bunch of fans and they shit on you. And then you're like, fuck you. That's to me privilege, but actually having something, right. That I don't think that's like the negative side of privilege. Right. Or it would be like us coming to China and doing English language podcasts and then like, oh, people don't listen to us. Right. So privilege is when you have something that other people don't have. And I think the negative reaction is then when you don't appreciate it, right? You're not grateful for it.
Or when you expect a certain outcome.
Yeah, when you expect a certain outcome. So
Right.
I don't think there's any of that. So on your side. So I think it's really great that you feel expressive in using Chinese. And I think it must come from, your all your experience like living here, but also all the documentaries.
But it's almost like we're exposed to an idea. Like it might be a thing that people are arguing about in online or recent times, the media or as a film or something. And in trying to talk about it in Chinese, we use that as an excuse to try to describe it and to try and tackle it in our own terms.
Yeah.
It's fresh and new for us. And in that conversation with Jolasha as well, she's forced to kind of explain bits of it that we don't get.
Yeah.
And in that process, I think our audience gets to hear a thing that might have just been, oh, I understand that because I heard about it, like a friend told me. But then we kind of deconstruct it and like dissect it. And I have this thing, it's a joke, I call it attack the root. It's like a rhetorical device, which is basically about like examining the question rather than answering the question.
Yeah.
But I make this joke, but I mean, obviously it's a thing that comes up in the show, but I always joke when somebody says to me, oh, 今晚要吃中餐还是西餐? And I always go, 要不我们吃东餐吧? And it's like, oh, we'd never say that. That's like a really weird idea.
Yeah.
But in saying Dongtan, you're actually saying there's something weird about Xitan. Do you know what I mean? Like if you say Xitan to me, that's the same feeling as when I say back to you, let's go and eat some Dongtan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a really weird, alienating feeling. Like you don't really know what I'm talking about. Like, what do you mean when you say
That's
that?
perspective, and that's
Yes.
what's very interesting for I'm going to guess a lot of your listeners.
Yes.
Because you offer different perspectives that make a listener go, oh, I never thought about that. That's interesting. That's cool.
And it's often to do with like not the answer to the question, but like why are we even talking about that?
It's not even. It's like one is questioning the concepts in general, but two is in that specific example, you can even question like, well, maybe there should be a dongchan, right? Because I could just refer to like Asian food or Eastern food or
but
whatever.
I think that
right?
often the default here is to grow up with the default assumption that Chinese food is so different from everything else that it's not understandable in those kind of terms, whereas Western food is more like itself, which is not 100% untrue, but it's worth unpacking as an idea.
For
Do you know what I
sure.
mean? Like it's worth unpacking that and saying, why are we assuming that? And I think one of the things we look at, in a way, it brings us back to like the 6, is to take like the myths that we tell ourselves, and we're all subject to them. Chinese people know more than anyone else. And then try to work out why it is that we tell that myth. For example, I do think it's true. I don't think it's particularly prejudiced to say that Chinese people do tend to grow up assuming and being told that Chinese food is the best food in the world. And I'm not saying it isn't. That's perfectly fine to think that it is. But to be told that it is and then assume that the whole world thinks the same thing. Like as in foreigners who haven't been exposed to Chinese food yet don't know that it's the best. When they find out, they're like, oh my God, I've grown up eating shit food my whole life. And this is incredible. I didn't know. What I think is interesting from a perspective point of view to say is to say a thing that I think a lot of Chinese people don't often hear, which is there's a certain number of foreigners, quite a lot, who arrive in China and go, oh my God, the food all tastes the same. And to not appreciate that there are differences when you're inside it that make it really different. It's not that it's not different. It is different. But that difference isn't a thing that everyone can see. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's a thing you have to be inside it and examine it to look. And then you have to keep going. Like I always say in Filmmaking, it's like the metaphor is like the close up and the wide shot. Like you have to constantly switch wide to close to understand the thing. You have to go like right out and then right back in and right out and right back in to see it. So you have to understand why that's a sort of trope of Chinese culture, is that food is incredibly precious and it has this cultural meaning. But I think you also, it's really interesting to then jump right back out and say, actually, that isn't something that everyone agrees with. That's like a thing that you can talk about and examine as an idea. And honestly, the truth is that nobody thinks they come from a country with terrible food.
Except
true.
for the
Even you guys?
Except for the British.
Even us guys.
Even you guys?
No, because you know what
even
British
we
people
don't
say?
do
Like,
that.
because we have Indian food. That's what you
Well,
would
they
say.
do one of two things. They say either,
claimed
well,
Indian
yes,
food.
but we have the best Indian food, or the other one they do is kind of boring, but it's I think closer to the truth, which is that British food was like the worst of all the European/American foods. They were worst hit by a combination of post-Second World War, like austerity and rationing, and then the industrialization of the food industry where everything went into tins and got powdered. Like my grandparents' generation, my grandmother just loved like opening a can of peas. She just thought that
There's
was like
something
the
about it.
most
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
exciting thing in the world. And there's another part which I think that people don't notice. And this is, by the way, where we can ramble about food for like the whole podcast because like these things turn up, which is that, you know, I think people don't appreciate now what it meant in the 50s and 60s for women in particular to be freed from the kitchen by the convenience of just food in tins. You know what I mean? Like it meant
Interesting,
something.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it meant something
The
to be
underlying
liberated.
meaning.
Like, of course, they were completely ignoring the fact that it tastes like shit, you know, and it's destroyed the food. But at the same time, there is something to be said for, you know, crack open 3 tins. One has meat, one has peas, and one has, you know, and you don't have to cook. And then suddenly it's not you
There's
doing
something
all the
about it.
cooking. There is something in that. Like,
I mean, let's be honest here, Justin.
true.
Let's be honest here. I mean, don't you have a reaction when you pop open a Chef Boyardee mini ravioli?
Oh, absolutely, of course.
Huh?
yes.
Yeah, Chef
There's something
Boyardee.
about it. It's
The
nasty,
best-
but it's delicious.
I've never had better ravioli than Chef Boyardee ravioli to this day. I can go to the fanciest Italian restaurant. I will never have a better ravioli than Chef Boyardee.
Do you know what we're talking about, Chef Boyardee?
I think it's been
Canned
mentioned, but
ravioli.
I've never had it. But it's canned ravioli.
It's basically what we grew up.
Right.
When we grew up, it was, I mean, every kid, I'm not going to generalize, but a lot of kids grew up eating these canned Italian food.
Yeah,
It
Chef
was-
Boyardee canned ravioli. I mean,
Did you
the
ever have that,
sauce, the
Eric?
tomato
Is it
sauce.
still around? You can get it now.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
And is
yeah.
it super delicious, or is it just because people go
good.
one of two ways?
It would
They
be the
either like
best.
love it or
It's good.
It'll be
It's
the best
good.
ravioli you've ever had in your life.
Well, okay, hold on. Think about it this way, right? So we all know the packaged food industry in America. I mean, it's, you know, just taps into people's weaknesses and
Yes.
like it's good, right? Of course, like TV dinners, I could eat weeks.
It's created in a lab.
Yeah, it's created
Yes.
in the lab. Of course, it's like optimized. So like, you know, the downside is not fresh, but you know, they've engineered it to appeal to your taste buds.
Yes.
So like deviled ham, like fucking, all those Stouffer's TV dinners, Totina's pizza. I could eat that shit for months if
Yeah.
I mean,
Hot Pockets.
Hot Pockets.
Oh, Hot Pockets were a thing when
Yeah.
I went over. I did
Like-
my first time in the US. I was like, this is incredible.
During the summers, like I ate that because like basically, a lot of Asian kids, they just stayed at home during the summers. Their parents weren't in any financial sort of situation to send them to summer camp or whatever. So you would like at 12 years old, I mean, you'd just be at home by yourself.
We have a thing I talk about in the show, and I've come up with a Chinese name for it, but we call it pocket meat. So it's like English food that's like meat that just sits in your pocket. You can just carry it around. So it's like a Scotch egg. It's just a hard-boiled egg wrapped in sausage meat with breadcrumbs on the outside, deep fried.
You just keep that in your pocket?
Well, some people do. They'll walk around all day. I'm gonna go out. I guess I'll take a Scotch egg. Just keep it in the pocket.
That's a real thing.
People do it, and there's a comedian in the UK who started like using the phrase, but now tons of people do it, and we just call it pocket meat. So it could be a Scotch egg, it could be a sausage roll, it could be what we call a pork pie.
But you put it in a plastic bag though, right? Or something?
Well, I mean, if you're old school, you just put it in the pocket. I
So
think.
just raw dog in the pocket.
Raw dog in the pocket. Yeah.
Wow.
big old oil stain.
All staying in the pocket, and you just keep going, and it's like your best pan. You never wash it; it just keeps building up flavor. So it's pocket meat. So we talk about this on the show. Like these for us, these come back as like constant things.
That's a running gag.
Yeah, it's a running gag. We do.
And the hardcore listeners, the long-term listeners will appreciate
They do. We
that.
have a few, and that's another thing. I never thought we'd have like running gags, but pocket meat is one of the things we talk about. We have this phrase. We actually made some merchandise recently with a phrase that I've been using for years, and now it's become a thing that our listeners talk about and they like share it. So in French, they have the same like Chinese. I don't know if any of you speak French, but they have a ning and they have a ni.
Yeah.
Just like Old English had a thou and a you, yeah, but it disappeared in English. But just like the ning and the ni, and then French they have vous and tu.
Yeah.
Yeah. So vous for plural and for respect.
Oh, like Spanish is the same.
Same as Spanish, yeah. So, but in French, and I think in Spanish, there is a verb, which is the verb to call me vous. So like when you call me this respectful word, there's a verb to say, you are doing that, you are calling me vous. There's a verb for that. They call it vous voyez. That's the verb to call me vous.
Easy at the end.
Yeah, vous voyez.
with vous.
So there's a phrase in French when somebody calls you vous, and you think that they shouldn't, like, hey, we're friends. Don't call me vous, call me tu. So they say, ne vous voyez pas, or tu ne vous voyez pas. It's basically don't call me vous. So I feel like Chinese doesn't have this phrase. Like people call me lo lao shi. I'm okay with that because it's like a job thing, like a lo dao, lo lao shi. But then I don't like the ning. I don't want to be a ning. So I started saying like several years ago, especially on WeChat, because face to face is a bit embarrassing. But somebody would be like, "lo lao shi ning, 下个礼拜来北京吗?" And I would say, 别宁我. Like people immediately know what it means. So I started using it, and then I started using it on the show. So now there's this whole
And people are picking that
gun,
up.
this whole gun, which
that's
is
great.
me saying
Yeah.
别宁我. And so now we have caps with 别宁我 on it. So just don't call me Ning.
Interesting.
So this is like
That's
a
great.
fun thing that would be harder to do in English, I think, for us, because we're so silly in Chinese. Also, I have to say, it's not exactly the same as privilege we talked about, but it's maybe a lack of perspective. I happen to come from a culture where well, actually, we ended up with you in English, which is the vous. It's not the tu, because the tu is thou. So we lost the friendly one in English, and we kept the plural and the formal one. But
interesting.
having said that, there's only one now, so there's no other choice. You can't say thou anymore. It's only thou. Only
Oh,
you.
so that
Only
was,
do.
So
Only do.
that wasn't
You
the
were.
polite version?
Thou is the ni.
Really?
Yeah, and
so you was
you
the
is
polite
the
version?
ning.
Because thou seems so...
Yeah, thou
right?
shall
Like,
not.
thou.
No, thou
So-
is
seems
like
so
Beard thou.
highfalutin.
Beard thou.
Beard thou. Don't thou me. But that's the friendly one, and we kept them all. I don't know why we kept that. Maybe I don't know. One went out of fashion, and so it stopped meaning politeness. It was just the standard word. But because of that, I think if I really unpack it, like you're saying, somewhere deep inside me, there's kind of a cultural prejudice. Why are you making hierarchies when I don't feel like I'm the same as you? So I'm always pulled towards. And Paul jokes about this. I'm constantly saying things are the same, not different. Paul tends to incline more towards pointing out the differences, whereas I'm always he will say, we have another thing we say on the show. I'm constantly saying culture shock. I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even what does that feel like? Is it a medical thing? What's the
Is
thing?
it a medical
Like,
thing?
I don't know what it means.
You know what? Like I the last one you just said, right? Like, oftentimes I'll travel around for work or whatever. And I'll be in like different offices with, a same company, but people from different offices.
yeah.
And I'll get a little bit passive aggressive when people ask me the question, what's different, depending on what mood I'm in. And if I'm being like snarky a little bit, then I'll like do this very passive aggressive thing where I'll kind of lecture someone in this roundabout way and basically say that it's kind of hint that it's dumb to think about differences. And I'll kind of do this whole thing and it'll come back to actually everything is the same. And you're just sort of like, you don't see things in a broad enough level. That kind of thing. Right?
I think that's what I'm doing.
A little bit, right?
Oh, yeah.
But okay, so putting that aside, that's probably not a great habit. But in general, though, I do like sort of zooming out to a level where you see more similarities because there's already a lot of polarization in the world. And then zooming back in and saying, okay, well, there are some nuances, but if you zoom out to this level, there's actually a lot more similarities.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the first comment. The second one about the 别拧我 thing, right? I like it because you're just, you're being sassy. And then I think the final thing more to Howie's point is it would be interesting to talk to a Chinese person and ask them, are you ever in a situation where another Chinese person would say "ning" and you don't think it's appropriate, and then what's your response? Like, what's your version of 别拧我? Right.
I've asked this last one I've asked a lot.
Right.
Like, how do they say it?
Yes.
And then the standard reply, if you don't want them to say it, is to say
别客气.
别客气.
Yeah.
But the problem with 别客气 is if someone's just said 罗老师您下个礼拜来北京吗? Then you don't know what they're talking about. The whole thing, don't be 客气. What's the 客气 bit? Is it the 罗老师? Is it what are you asking me?
Yeah.
We played around with different versions, by the way, in the show. Like, would you 别拧化我? You know, to make it a verb, or you know,
拧那个头.
拧个头, 拧你妹. It was like, what would you do with the ning? But in the end, in the end, the audience said that actually 别拧我 was like the most comfortable way of saying it. You just turn ning into a verb.
Well, 拧你妹 is like
拧你妹, yeah, that's right. So, but but I'm constantly pulled towards like the similarities thing is it's almost like pathological, and I think Paul and I lean into it. Like for me in the show, I'm always saying how everything's the same, and he's usually pointing out the big differences. But I do think it's funny. There's a lot of humor for me in when you see foreigners. I mean, you see them a lot on Xiaohongshu now. I don't know. Do you guys ever use do you ever use this concept of like the 白猴子? Like the white monkey, just foreigners who arrive in China and all they can say is, "Oh my God, I've never seen a road that's so high before. Oh my God, you guys have bikes here. It's amazing." You know, that kind of like real faux kind of like, "Oh my God, you guys are like a science fiction movie." That kind of thing that gets now the gung is to call it like a 白猴子, like a white monkey, like a performing monkey. You can only say incredibly weird, naive things about China. It's not that there aren't. Obviously, we all know there are lots of great things. There are things not so great. It's a complex place and all the rest of it. But that identity often comes with it this kind of naivety about difference, where, "Oh my God, people are so nice. It's amazing." I'm putting on that accent because in England that means a certain kind of thing. But, you know, it's like sort of weird, naive, kind of like yokel. And I'm like, I arrived in 96 and it was more different. And of course, there were people who'd been here since the 80s or the 70s and they'd seen even more. It was more different and it was pre-internet. I couldn't even look anything up, but there was nothing that was shocking. It was just humans doing the same things, like in a different... So how can you be shocked? Did you not look online before you arrived? What are you... I don't know what that means. Why are you so shocked?
You know
like
what it
is
is like, this is like Arthur flexing his, like, it's like these people are so unsophisticated kind of thing. And this is like his, well, you know, I've been here a number of odd years.
These savages.
I'm not going to tell you how many years I've actually been
I'm
here.
not
White monkeys.
20 years now.
Right.
We can't
this
speak
is
about
like,
those non-Anglo-Saxons. Like,
These are the Anglos. Hold on, these are the Anglo-Saxons that have been in China long enough to be able to take the piss out of the other Anglo-Saxons.
That's right.
Right?
That's
It's
the
like,
best
I know
kind.
what the hell's
Yeah.
going
That's
on.
exactly right. But no, I do think that when I turned up, I mean, there was no internet to check. I mean, there was an internet, but in 96, you couldn't look up a lot of stuff. And it wasn't that shocking to me. But I mean, maybe that's why I drift towards being
That's why
like
you're still here.
or why I make documentaries, because I'm kind of looking at things and not thinking they're alien, just thinking they're interesting and all the rest of it. There is and I am aware there is a kind of snobbishness to saying, you know, I see it so well that I see it's just the same. Like, why are you guys making a big deal about it's different? You know, but you know, you come across things that are more serious, and there are people who lean in online to certain identities that I look at and I go, I'm very uncomfortable with that. Like your identity is to be either super negative and everything's painful, or to be everything's, you know, heaven and the rest of the world is crazy in hell, the algorithms push people towards it more.
I think that's what it is, right? I think these people who are reacting in such extreme ways because they know they have to do it, because that's the only way, at least the way social media is set up now, content is set up now, where that's not the only way, but the fastest way, the easiest way to build that audience, to create your own sector.
Do you find it for you guys that it makes the difference that because we don't have video, so our faces are not revealed. Do you find that that's different? It affects the show in different ways, or does it make it different having the video or not having the video on the pure podcast audio format to the video format?
I think so, for sure. I think the biggest difference is for our video format, we just do clips. We don't. There's no.
Oh, you don't do the whole show video. Okay.
Yeah, at least not yet. We don't have full length show.
Yeah.
So
we have some of it on YouTube.
On
and
YouTube,
stuff like
but
that.
we stopped updating
a long
that
time ago.
Yeah, I saw some of the YouTube stuff.
Yeah, so
that
that's
was
all,
longer,
like,
wasn't
really
it?
old
That was
stuff.
longer. The YouTube stuff was longer.
It's the full episode.
Full show. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing that gets updated regularly now is our Xiaohongshu.
Yeah, I've seen that.
video,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
we're just doing clips. So when you do that, a lot of things can be taken out of context, or you don't hear the entire conversation to really get a feeling of like what our intentions are, because when you listen to the audio, you listen to the whole thing, or at least most of it, and then you kind of get an understanding and get eased into certain topics, and you understand there's like maybe good faith in us talking about certain things, even if we're being critical of certain things, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's a balance there. But when you take just a clip of like, a couple minutes of a conversation, of a 2-hour conversation, posted online, people can interpret that in any different number of ways, right?
What I like about the podcast world is it's just simpler because it's just who follows you and it goes in their feed. It's not, and it's not disappearing down a timeline because they're just getting 2 or 3, the latest podcast that they follow. And then there's something about that I find it's less, it makes me feel less angsty. It makes me feel like I understand it more. Yeah.
There's a pureness to audio where you're just, you're focused on the content of what people are saying and not the presentation of it.
Right.
Right. I like that pureness because sometimes, and this is like a kind of funny reoccurring thing we talk about off air sometimes. Like in the beginning, like I didn't really want to go video because I just felt like, once people see our faces, they're not going to like what we say anymore. You know what I mean?
There's a weird like as self-conscious as me and Howie are, and we view you as less self-conscious, but like sometimes he's really self-conscious about like the whole thing with the Chinese stuff. I'm just like, like we've been in China for so long, like, and I'll, sometimes I'll be somewhere and I'll get mad. I'll get worked up on something. I'll be like complaining, trying to yell. And the madder that I get, the worse my Chinese is.
Oh yeah.
And like literally I'm like,
yeah.
And then I'm like, I look to my wife and I'm like, help me. Bang, and then I'm just thinking like, and then there's that moment I'm like, I'm a total idiot, but like I don't care, right?
Yes.
Arthur, pleasure talking to you, man. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Yeah.
No, it's been great.
Hope you had a good time.
I feel like a changed man. This is the new start for me. I may embracing that I'm at 30. I may start embracing that I'm actually at 30 years now, and saying it started that day when I was with the guys from the from the podcast. And
this is your Titanic. Is that what you're saying?
my moment. From this moment on, my name has changed.
Yeah. I think we should just start calling each other Ning all the time. Like Ning.
I'm gonna start texting you.
谢谢您，就是今天。
Yeah, no. Well, thank you for that, guys.
Okay,
It's a
老师。
pleasure.
If people want to find your podcast, where do they go?
Well, I would say search for the Overshare because it's in English, it's easier, but that actually leads you to our old podcast. But yeah, if you speak Chinese, listen to Chinese, you're interested in listening to a Chinese podcast by 2 people who don't speak great Chinese, then 飞天胡说 is the fei of my name, like to fly, and then tian is like the sky or that time, and the 胡说 is 胡说八道, it means nonsense in Chinese. So 飞天胡说, you can find us on all of the podcast apps all over the world.
Great.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, I'm Justin.
I'm Howie.
I'm Eric. I'm Feng Long.
None
None of us want to be Feng Long. That's a hard.
but let's
tough.
big ups to that guy and all the passengers on the Titanic.
Yeah. Oh, and if you want to see that film, and I don't know where you guys watch it, but
Where
if you
do they
want to
go?
see that film, it's right now it's on iQIYI and Youku.
Yep.
And I think there are other platforms that have it too, but those are the original guys who got the sort of streaming rights for China.
Highly
And outside
recommended.
of China, if you're outside of China listening to this, what's great is we actually, it's a weird thing about films. They take years to like fully get them out in the world, unless they just get it released through Netflix or something. So we just sold the rights to a platform called Magellan TV.
Oh.
I think it's Magellan.tv. It's a dedicated documentary platform with documentary films. I think they work with Amazon, so I think you can find it in some markets with Amazon. But if you search for that, it is a paid membership. But if you're desperate to watch the film, you can get their free 1-week trial, watch the film, then cancel the membership.
I think it's on Amazon Prime because I was trying to buy it on Apple TV.
Yeah. I think it might be now, yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, definitely. Highly recommend it. The Six, that's what it's called in English. In Chinese, it's Liu Ren.
That's it.
Great documentary directed by our very guest, Arthur Jones. Once again, thanks for being here. All right, guys. Be good. Be well.
Peace.